Topic, eh? So we are live. I believe we're live. Yep. All intents and purposes, this is live. Sending you all much love, peace, blessings, harmony for those of you that are joining retrospectively and watching and recording. Om Shanti. Hope you're all well, having a great day, enjoying the beginning of what is going to be a wacky weekend. Well, middle of a weekend, actually, I suppose. I've got a wonderful foursome here to get us going. Lovely crowd to start us off. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce everybody. The topic is the 5 elements, which I think is going to be a fascinating topic when we look at it from different perspectives, all different sorts of perspectives, both occult perspectives as well as just practical, looking at the elements in terms of what they are and what they do and how they work. It's a very shamanic way of doing it. So let's start. I'm going to move around the screen clockwise because that's, I believe, normally the order in which people have arrived. We have on the right corner Indy Sage, and Indy is a shadow worker. He's also anthropologically inspired, so he's got anthropology in his belt. Is it anthropology? Am I getting this right? Yes, I believe so. And he helps people to work with their shadows, to integrate parts of themselves left behind in the ravages of the past, where we, through insecurity or through hurt or fear or whatever it is that's driving us, keeping us trapped in the proverbial cages of thought, cause us to split from ourselves and leave a part of ourselves in the past. And so he helps people to reintegrate these parts of themselves and come to terms with their shadow and reabsorb. Beautiful soul, beautiful brother. Indy has been with us for a long time, since I think like the beginning. We've also got dear Aaron here. Aaron is a lovely brother as well. He's been with us for quite a while now. He's working with Western occult ideas, seemingly, I would say, but it's an amalgamation. It's a digestion of sorts, a gestation of his own. And he's been working with various different lovely exercises of late. If you take a look at his YouTube channel, it's here in my recommended channels. And you can see his imagination exercises that he worked with last year. Beautiful exercises. Well, I say last year, last season. And he's now working with the exercises of the memory. And I'm sure he's going to have a lot of other fascinating exercises he'll be working with. So he works with the deep psyche as well. Also got a lot of experience in Rosicrucian kind of cosmology and philosophy, as well as other kinds of occult therapeutic ideas. Most of us here have sort of bounced around all over the field. We've got dear brother Cosmic with us here. Cosmic works with the Fae specifically. He's channeling a system from the Fae, very exciting. So every time we speak to him, the system's getting a little more concrete, a little more formed, a little more structured. And he's been working with the Fae for a number of years now. And so essentially he's channeling an entire sort of system of cosmology and a occult system, if you will, system of magic even. And getting sort of the proverbial lay of the land with the Fae as his guides. And so, yeah, I'm the Bush Whisperer. I'm a local shaman here in Cape Town, Simonstown. And between the four of us, we're going to be knocking the ball out and see what comes out when we roll about in the 5 elements. But I'd like to give you each a chance to introduce yourselves, moving around the screen clockwise. Dear Indy, if you could all each say a few words about yourself and plug yourself. Much love. Thank you all for joining us. An honor to have you guys with me here. It's such a lovely group. And just the right number, I think. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Franklin. And as Franklin mentioned, I do shadow work, and I do work in anthropology. I'm working on my master's degree, and I'm actually doing a 5-faceted project right now, working on trying to write a book series, trilogy as well. But right now, the 5-faceted work that I'm doing is integration of my passions and my endeavors in life, and it deals with anthropology and epigenetics, the ancestors and the ability of transformation and what's considered Lamarckian evolution, So I'm trying to bring back Lamarckian evolution, what I'm calling weak Lamarckian evolution. And I'm also working on a language project where I'm trying to bring back the language of the birds and understand the roots of our language, bring back its splendors that it used to have, a fullness to it of pictographic aspect, allegorical aspect. It was a mathematical aspect to the letters and a musical aspect as well, and of course numerical. So it's a beautiful project I'm working on, and I'd love to get more perspective all the time on it. And if anybody wants to check out some of my work, I also do some work in theoretical quantum physics, and I'm working on an integration theory. So a lot of that stuff is practical to the 5 elements today. And our discussion should be really exciting. And if you want to check out some of my work, it's at vibetribescribe.wordpress.com. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I primarily have been working with the imagination last season, which I think reflects the element of fire very well. And that's just kind of where I was inspired to start, because I think that few people have the imagination required for perceiving reality. And I've been working post summer solstice with memory, which from our last roundtable discussion was the element of water. And then so I'm kind of working this whole cyclical type process. And then when I'm feeling inspired, then I'm going to move towards air, which would be inspiration. And then finally to earth, which would be grounding. At least that's the vision that I have right now. I also work a lot with group dynamics, identity, and then the authentic, human experience. I also consider it the role of the mariner, and so I make a lot of maps and diagrams to help us navigate this vast ocean of consciousness and the human experience in general. I've got a unique background with the amount of groups that I've been involved with, and some of my past job roles and history, and just kind of the places I've been helps me have a unique perspective on spiritual and psychological warfare and counterintelligence. So that's my introduction. I'll pass it on to Cosmic.
Hey everybody, it's Cosmic here. Like Shaman said, I do work with the Fae, and I've been putting this system together for quite a while now. This will be an interesting conversation because I honestly haven't really, thoroughly integrated the 5 elements or seen any relevance for it with my current system. When it comes to like elements, it's almost more like thinking about consciousness is existing in, because we all think of like consciousness as sort of like one thing. And so what this system does is it thinks of consciousness in terms of 8 colors, and those colors are like the way consciousness presents itself is like a different element, is basically what I'm trying to say here. And so I don't know if this stuff has anything relevance to my system, but sometimes when I go into these conversations, I get ideas from you guys, and it kind of like inspires me. So maybe I'll find something I didn't notice before.
Yeah, we all get inspired, I think, because there's nothing like a wonderful. I hope my audio is okay. There's nothing like a wonderful melting pot to get the cauldron of thought churning and prepare a meal of thought that can be thoroughly digested and psychologically and philosophically nutritious, to coin a phrase. And since we're going to be speaking of metaphor, the elements, I think this is going to come up, the whole idea of digestion and how the body and the organs work. To begin with, I mean, what we're undertaking here, and I use the word undertaking not lightly. Undertaking is, you know what an undertaker is, right? We're talking about like burying those that have come and been, and their flesh puppets have been set aside. It's a grave matter, and it's a big undertaking that we are attempting to jump in here, because the Taoist system of elements are so different in the way that they consider the elements to the Vedic system of elements, or to the Western school of elements. And so what we're going to be discussing, just for those of you that have just joined us, is essentially the 5 elements. Now, the 5 elements means different things depending on which cultural hat you're wearing, which perspective, which narrative you're following. From a Western perspective, it's closer to that of the Vedic perspective in terms of the ideologies associated with it. That we've got the earth element, the water and the fire, and the air element. And then we have this quintessence, as we call it in the Western schools of occult, or in the Vedic schools of occult, we call it the Akashic field, Akashic records are terms that we all know. This relates to essentially the 5th element. And the 5th element is the anther as well, as it was known to the ancient Greeks. And according to this cosmology, all the other elements arose from the anther. Different levels of complexity, different levels of differentiation have given rise to the more complex elements in terms of proverbial density. Although I don't think it's quite as simple as that. But there's a very different way of looking at it. The Taoist system doesn't consider the quintessence or the anther or the akasha as the 5th element. What they do in the Taoist system is they consider the air element as being binary, as being a binary expression of 2 elements, of the metal and the wood. So there's considerable difference here. The one seemingly to me is insinuating the physicality and the finality of the causal experience, the Taoist system. And the other 2 systems seem to be looking more at the philosophical nature of these elements and how they work on a more spiritual level. But I'd love for you guys to jump in, kick the ball in whatever direction. Who would like to kick the ball? And let's roll with it. Okay, I'll kick the ball. How's that? Unless somebody wants to jump in if you want. So the difference between the Taoist and the Vedic schools. I think it's very easy for us to get book ideas when it comes to the elements, and for these book ideas to start taking predominance. I mean, the Taoists have really done a wonderful job at mapping out the organs as they relate to the elements and the elemental energies. And lovely to see you guys all in the chat. Hope you're well. We've got Kevin. We've got Take a Little Trip. We've got Aaron in the chat here. We've got Mexico. Sending you all much love, peace. And those of you that aren't in the chat, welcome to you too. Enjoying the sidelines. Please feel free to join in, express yourself, ask questions. This is a completely open, safe space. So yeah, looking at the differences, I think can cause us to become a little bit confused about the elements to a certain degree. I know it confused me, and I spent years trying to find reconciliation between why the elements were considered in such a different way in the Taoist system to the Western system. So, okay, in the Western school of thought, we consider the 4 elements to be present in the body, in the guf, from the Western school of occult, which is much affected by the Kabbalistic cosmology. And so we speak of the Isia, the guf, the physical body, as having 4 elements from which it is made. And these 4 elements are present in the physical earth element, which is a very interesting idea. So from that notion, we think of the fire as being primal. And then the fire is embodied within the water. Within the water element, we contain the spark of fire, which in itself is interesting. I want you to consider diamagnetism for a minute and just exactly what that could represent, water being diamagnetic. And within this water element, or shall we say that the water element exists within the fire element? Probably a better way of looking at it. And within this, we have the expression of the air element. And the air element is then expressing through the earth element a nature of itself, as is the fire, as is the water. So the earth is considered to be the place where the other three elements meet and become something else, the fourth principle, which is the principle of cohesion, structure, solidarity, the fixed alignment of things, as opposed to the mutating, mutable alignments of the air element, as opposed to the watery, reflective, transcendent elements of water, all bringing the life-bringing principles of the fire, that inspiration, that kick that gives us the first impulse. And that impulse then transmits itself through these different states of being. And so it's been quite mapped out in terms of two different ways of looking at it. We can look at it in terms of, the most fundamental nature or character or personality of those elements. And then we can look at it as the body of those elements. So when we look at it as the personality of the elements, we're thinking of it as the four worlds. Now we're looking at the shaman, the three worlds of the shaman. So we have the divine plane. And the divine plane is a plane of pure light. And pure light you could think of as the expression of fire, because fire basically produces light. Enough light will produce a fire. They are sort of inexplicably linked. And this then is reflected back at us by the water and contained by the water, the same way that the water contains the heat, it contains the reflection of the light. In order for us to be able to see things, water has this very powerful effect within our systems. We wouldn't be able to see visually if it weren't for the water in our eyes. That's why our eyes have to be wet. Something to think about. And obviously the air then becomes the agent through which we can attract these two qualities of fire and water. The in-breath, inspiration, and the out-breath, the release, the letting go. And so we can see how the fire and the water principle are operating within our consciousness, operating within our bodies. These polarities of fire and water are being bound by air, which binds the water and the fire, which means that the air should be bipolar. And why do I say this? Well, part of the air needs to be able to fix to water. Part of the air needs to be able to fix to fire. And those are very opposite qualities, sort of like wood and metal. So when we look at the element of air and we look at the element of wood and metal, that makes perfect sense. And why the Taoist system is looking at the earth element as being in the center of the wheel is because in Malkut we consider, and it is worth looking at the colors of Malkut. So when you look at Malkut as a Sephirot, as a structure within the Sephirotic tree, which is a reflection of the etheric field when it's in its most crystallizing, manifesting state, where all the other principalities of all 9 principalities are actually manifesting together to produce a cohesive structure through which a unified field of reality can be experienced, which is why we seem like we're in this single continuum of reality. So this physical reality of Malkut, or the physical sphere, contains within it an aspect of the air, but it's not the purest air, as with the color of the Magi, that pure bright yellow. It's a citrine, earthy kind of yellow. And it contains within it the fire, but it's not that red, scarlet, orange, red fire. It's a russet, earthy red. And it contains within it also the blue of the water, but it's not a clean blue. It's a bluish, greenish, earthy citrine. Olive color. So you've got these 3 colors that are blending into the color of darkness, the black, where there is no color, which represents the sort of the womb of the world, the void. So you can see these in Malkut. You've got a cross, literally, in that Sephirot. And that cross contains all 4 of these colors. And so that cross is somehow related to the Taoist system, though with a difference. With the Taoist system, have taken the element of air that stands between fire and water and given it two faces, which I think is quite appropriate. What do you guys think?
I got a few comments. So when thinking of the different elements, I I realized that perhaps maybe my different energy centers, or if I'm focusing on the three different worlds of the shaman, it kind of changes my relationship to how I perceive each of the elements. And I think this might be inherent in its kind of design, because it breaks down kind of that dogmatic fixed definition where we just want the element just to mean one thing in all scenarios. And so that really kind of breathes the life into the spirit. And one of my recent videos, I was focusing on the difference between feeding and fasting. So that's been something I've been playing with for the last couple weeks. And so fire kind of reminds me of the feeding energy, and I related fire to kind of feeding the imagination. And water is almost kind of a little bit more of the fasting. It kind of washes away and cleanses and dissolves maybe all of um, the clutter. And I think of water makes me think of baptism and kind of getting rid of a lot of the programming and ideas. And also fire is, like you had mentioned, it reminds me of light, like it's a gift from the gods. It's almost mysterious. Air, it ignites, it breathes heat. It reminded me of the generator principle, when we're thinking of I think the Vedic. And then water extinguishes. It's almost like it can be seen as the destroyer. Earth is the entire container. I was seeing that as almost like the regulator. It's the got a loud car going by. Earth, so the container, the regulator, it's able to house the other elements and whatever combustion and everything is going on. So that was kind of the visual I was getting as you were talking.
Yeah, I like to see a lot of this. I could see through Ayurveda and through Taoist means, and then also it's interesting to see how that plays into how it's seen in the West. But I feel like wood and metal are like also like components of Earth. But it's interesting that they have that much of a dynamic triple aspect of Earth, and I find that for me, I feel like I have a lot of resonance with fire and water in my life. In my Chinese zodiac, I'm a water dog, and so that water aspect to me represents like a transmutative aspect of like being able to hold the shape of the container you're within and having like a versatility to you, being able to change form and kind of just having that aspect. Also, water is associated with in the Chinese five elements associated with the drilling aspect that it has. Kind of as it's mentioned in the Tao Te Ching, that water is soft and flexible, yet it can wear down the most rigid surfaces through time, gradually. So it's very powerful in that it can combat the most like formidable components in nature like stone and take them down. So water's very powerful and in many ways, and it has a lot of different aspects to it. And even though it's flexible, it's also um, able to be drilling as well. So water in a way, I think according to the Chinese five elements, is said to of course destroy fire and fire Fire is said to create earth, earth create metal, metal create water, water create wood. and wood create fire. So I find that arrangement is interesting in the sense that it says that fire creates earth, and so I see that fire creates ashes. And so, in that sense, like yes, there's definitely an aspect of that. But there's different ways you could look at the five elements they have. But I like the way that it's arranged, and the star that you can put in the middle of those five elements can show how they antagonize one another and how they destroy one another. So fire destroying metal, metal destroying wood, wood destroying earth, and earth destroying water. In a lot of ways, when I look at that star, I think of like metal destroying wood, and it said that metal is splitting. I think they're kind of like referring to an axe in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of other components to metal now that we've been using it for so many other things in after the Industrial Revolution, after this whole thing has been set up. But it's interesting to see how it's played out, and you could add more aspects to that. And so I think there's so much on all this. Also, my Ayurvedic element is fire. I have a Pitta dosha, so in that sense, I see that fire relates a lot to passion, and fire relates a lot to being able to kind of control your energy and your anger and channel that into constructive means. That's a big element of fire for me. Just having that a lot of energy I have to channel, and just a robustness in my mind, power, a lot of light and energy there from the fires within. And it makes me think of the violet flame and blue flame, blue fire. Which I associate with the throat chakra, speaking my truth.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, brother. I think that's very interesting when you're looking at your Vedic doshas and how they relate. And I do think that it's interesting when we look at the elemental attribution of the Vedic school of thought, right? That they speak of the five elements. They have quite a developed system of working with what they call the tattva. And so you've got the five elements as they seen in the Vedic school of thought. And it's been a long time since I've touched up on this, but I believe it's 22 minutes, which is rather interesting as the time goes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And these cycle through. And so you got the earth element, which relates to, obviously, it's, if memory serves, that's priviti. You got the water element, which is apas. And apas is an interesting word because up is you. If you talk in to people, you talk apka. This is you. Apas is almost like a reflection of you. And then you've got the Agni element, which is fire, which is what you were talking about, which is also has a name of Tejas. And then you got the air element, right? And the Vayu. And they speak of the Havai, of the wind. And in Afrikaans language, you speak about a lavai. A lavai is a noise, but it's made by lungs. People talking loudly and shouting and partying is a lavai, which is interesting. Havai is the wind. And then you've got the Akash, which is that quintessence, that ether, that fifth element from whence all the other elements are drawn. And they relate to the chakras. Now, this is very interesting how different the Taoist system and the Vedic system are. Because in the Indian system, they speak of the earth element as being related to Muladhara chakra, related to the sense of smell. And they speak of the water element as being related to the sacral plexus, the bladder, and such sexual generative organs, and the sense of taste. And which is why lovers want to kiss in order to get their passion and their desire flexing. When you kiss your lover, you become full of desire and passion. And fire element, which they speak of, which is very interesting because the triangle is an inverted triangle. That tetrahedron is pointing downwards, which in itself is just interesting because in the Western schools we think of it as an upright triangle, which is quite a different concept. That relates to Manipura, which is the gem that is touching all things: the pancreas, the stomach region, the what we call the solar plexus chakra, even though it's not the true solar plexus, it's what we call the solar plexus chakra. And then the Anahata chakra, which is the element of air, which is the heart chakra, is where we, circulation and the breath moving through the heart, and the breath of the lungs encapsulated with the heart, working as part of a system of the heart chakra. And then the Visuddhi chakra is the hormones, the hormonal centers within the throat, which relates to our subtle emotional intelligence, that intuitive ability to pick up on information, not necessarily by logic or by analysis or such driven mental principles or processes, but just through the vibrational sense of what it is. And so these 5 elements are also not the be all and end all, because these are all within the sphere of the 6th element, which is the element of thought. Now it gets interesting. So they speak of the 6th element, the thought element, as containing all of these. And so the 6th sense is that sense when you just know something. And when you've got a voice talking to you, it's the 5th element. When you're hearing, clairaudience. And clairvoyance is related to the fire element. And being able to know how to move and where to be, good luck, is a reflection of the water element. You see why the Taoists are so fixed on the water. Because taste is a very important sense. If you've got taste, you'll always be in a tasteful situation. You'll always deal with things tastefully. You'll find the right place to be where you belong. And then the sense of smell is that deep-rooted instinct, animal instinct. So when we look at how those elements move and how they relate to those chakra energy fields, it's very interesting because we see the water element as standing above the earth element. And upon that, so the design of a stupa, if you've ever considered the design of a stupa, there's something quite interesting in it. Because you've got your block, then you've got your, can we call it a crescent shape? And then you've got your triangle. And then you've got your sphere. And then you've got your diamond or oval on the top. You can see the stupa formation is reflecting these 5 elements. So it's very much a part of Buddhist cosmology as well. It's the Vedic school of cosmology, because they are basically reflecting the forms of the tattvas, which is a sphere for the element of air. Traditionally, it would be green or blue. A tetrahedron or a triangle that's inverted, red, typically. A crescent of a moon shape, typically white or even silver, would be the traditional colors relating to the element of water. And the earth would be a cube or a square, typically yellow in traditional cosmology, the shape and color of that substance. And obviously the aether and the akasha would be this color of the night sky, indigo violet, but generally that indigo color, the color when it's not quite dark, but it's going to get dark. The sky goes that deep indigo color. That's relating to the akash. And that shape is an oval, the shape of an egg. And so they've got quite a good system of understanding the elements from a Vedic perspective. Very different to the Taoists. What do you guys think about the Vedic understanding of the elements and how they relate to them?
I was muted. I feel like it's fascinating. In the West, there's really supposed to be 4 elements, and we kind of like know that there's a secret 5th element. It's not really part of the systems. But in Vedic, ether is definitely part of the systems of the different elements. And in my Vedic astrology, in my moon sign, which was normally a Scorpio in the Western astrology zodiac, in the Vedic astrology, I have a Swati moon sign, which is associated with Lord Rahu. And Rahu is associated with ether. So his element is ether. And so, in that sense, Rahu allows for the powers of imagination, for the powers of the imagination and the ability for there to be a fabric for it to be created upon. So without the ether, to be able to allow things to have space, to be able to occupy that space, everything would be collapsed and there would be no room for things to hold place. And so in that sense, ether is very important as an element because it used to be the element that represented what we now call outer space, which is really what we refer to as kind of being empty. But it used to be known as something very meaningful and substantial, being a fabric. And I like to still see it in that sense. Einstein was the one that kind of threw that word out of science because he didn't find it to be applicable in his formulas. But I feel like he could have been really missing out on something there. And later on, when he figured out a lot of things in quantum physics, it kind of threw all of his works kind of up in the air again. So I feel like he could have needed to have brought that back, but never realized it. But it's very important to me to see that there's a fabric upon which light travels. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been developing a theoretical quantum physics integration theory with astrophysics and particle physics to understand that ether is the thing upon which the strings unravel. If in my theory I'm integrating string theory, and the idea is that when we see a beam of light traveling across the ether, what's happening is that there were in the shells of the electrons bundles of ether that are unraveling and then travel in a line. But when they come across matter of another celestial body, it will bend space because, in my theory, matter is composed of bent ether that's wrinkled or bundled upon itself. So I feel like ether could be the essential component that could explain a lot of things.
I kind of related fire imagination to more of the Western side of things. And it seems like, at least from the living in the Western type world, it's very much about almost like the hustle mentality. Everything's got to be more. It's very feeding, consuming more and more. It's competitive. And then when I think of Eastern, then Eastern was more water memory for me, because it's being okay with who you are, the situation that you're in, not having to be in control of everything, just being calm, relaxed, remembering who you are, and just being part of a larger divine system. And that one is much more grounding for me. So I like to oscillate kind of between the two. The Meta Soundworks had recommended this video to me, and I thought it was really interesting because the video was it showed a circle, and then it had a little dot in the middle, and it was showing the different forms of how to view this circle. And then so it's kind of like the microcosm reflects the macrocosm, and then it also inverted it to show kind of like a cone shape. So then you've got your circle on the bottom and then the point at the top, and then that can even develop into a spiral. And so it was the being represented as the oldest symbol that we have seen throughout ancient history. And the visual, when I'm thinking of these elements, is air, water, and fire in the circle, and then earth kind of being the center in the middle. And then ether is almost like outside of all of that. And then you almost get to the ether not by just venturing outside the circle, but it's like going in towards the center almost creates kind of like the paradox where you go inside in order to see what's beyond on the outside. And so the ether kind of is known almost through learning about the relationship between air, water, fire, and earth, and kind of maybe some more of the mystical relationships and properties between all of them. And then I'm still going back to thinking, oh darn, lost my thought. I'll have to check my notes and come back to it.
Yeah. I know ether is also associated with like the realm of the imagination, the realm of the spirit, of being able to travel with the astral body in the higher planes of consciousness. It's the ether in which the correct me if I'm mistaken, but it's the Akashic halls are part of the ethereal realm in the ether.
Oh, my thought was that the various energy centers, like if I'm thinking of kind of like my headspace, which is kind of the pinnacle point of that cone shape, well, then the elements respond and react a little differently than if I'm moving towards more of my lower root energy centers. But then it goes back to kind of the cone visual where I can kind of take a different perspective if I go to the top, and then I learn more about the relationship at the bottom. But then if I go to the bottom, then I take on a new perspective to the top. And so it's like the different elements seem to invert and flip the relation, just like how I think of the etheric and the astral kind of seems to kind of invert the perspective. And then there's kind of this play between all of them, just kind of depending on which area of focus I'm looking at. Does that visual making any sense?
Yeah, I like the cones and the spirals.
Yeah, it's sort of like a building. Like if you're at the top of the building, everything's focused downwards and it's just down. If you're at the bottom of the building, you're looking upwards. You're so small, right? You're so small, everything's pushing down and the earth is pushing up at you. But if you're at the top of the building, it's like the earth is pulling you down and you're so big and vast and everything's so small and abstract and far down there. So it's quite an interesting, different perspective. And also like water, if you're down here on the earth, the water's coming down at you. If you're up there, the water's going down there. So it's like it totally is an inverted aspect of perspective. And I think it holds true on all levels. And speaking about the aether, I think this is where it becomes so. So we've got the aether as it's known by the ancient Greeks, and then we've got the akasha as it's known by the Vedic schools, and we've sort of mixed them up, even though they are mixed up. According to the ancient Greeks, the aether is the element from whence all the other elements arise. So it's sort of neuter in terms of its polarities. It's neuter. It's got everything within it, but it has no character of its own. Sort of like an example would be your hard drive of your computer. You got your hard drive, and it's just where everything is. And then you've got your CPU, which is the thinking capacity of your hard drive. And then you've got your RAM. And your RAM is where the actual work's getting done. And so you can think of it as, the inspiration comes from the CPU, right? And you can think of the Akasha could be relating to the actual hard drive, where it's taking all of the substance from in order to compute. And the RAM is where the work is being done. And this is all happening by a communication system, which is connecting the RAM to the CPU so that the RAM can carry the workload of the CPU somewhere for it to happen. Sort of like the CPU are the builders and the RAM is the building site. And the hard drive is the storeroom where all the building materials are kept and the plans and everything else as it relates to it. So I think there's a lot of interesting concepts to be looked at when we look at the way a computer works, for example. And then, of course, you've got the interface, right? Your screen and your keyboard and your mouse, whereby you're able to interact with the RAM. And so if we could probably break that down to be elemental in nature, we are able to affect and change and communicate things through our keyboards and through our screen. So it's the interface. I don't understand why. What is it? My mother always phones me on the round table. I'll have to remind her of my time schedule. She always manages to call me while I'm on the round table. It's classic. I must note to self, give your mom a call after the round table if it's not too late. Shouldn't be too late. It's probably about tomorrow because I'm going to be seeing her tomorrow. Seeing my mom's new man. So it's going to be exciting. I haven't seen her in a while. She's been moving house. It's been a whole big, moving house is such a palaver, isn't it? Your whole life needs to go into boxes and you need to relocate yourself. And she's been moving in with her, her new BFF. So
what element do you think moving represents?
Well, that's an interesting concept. Moving house. I think it's two things happening. One of them, I think, is relating to the earth, right? That's when you've settled. The principle of actually moving could have two elements to it, water and air, because there's different parts of moving, right? The first part of moving is logistics, right? Figuring out how to put them into boxes. Where are the things going to go? Am I going to be able to take all my stuff with me? Do I need to get rid of some stuff? Is everything going to fit in the new place where I'm going? Or how is it, the logistics behind it? And then the logistics of how am I going to get a truck? Am I going to get a pickup van? How am I going to do this? How many trips am I going to do? How long is it going to take me? And then there's the actual act of moving it. So we often used to move things through water. We still do, don't we? So the air and water are two of our moving mediums that we move things around. In our body, things tend to move around through the medium of water. Yeah. But it only moves around through the medium of water because of the medium of air, of the lungs, giving the polarity to water so that the water can keep moving. So there's a combination there between water and air, I think. Hello, welcome, Vasudeva. Namaste. Hope you're all well. And yeah, exactly. Wow, Moonfeather. Blessed be to Moonfeather. Those of you that haven't checked it out, go and check out Moonfeather's channel. It's on here. He's launched a new t-shirt campaign, tops, clothing. I don't know what else she's launched, but I think there's going to be a lot of clothes coming out of Moonfeather Palace. So go and check out Moonfeather's Palace. It's lovely to have you here, my dear. I hope everything's good. I hope you're happy, thriving. Yeah.
I got a new
Yeah.
visual, Bush Whisperer. So
Go
I'm
ahead,
thinking
brother.
I'm thinking of when people used to move across land in ancient times, they would construct a boat. And so it was a sailboat. And so in order to move, they're going from one piece of earth to another. And so they've got their boat, and then they're riding on the boat across the waters. And the air is what allows them to traverse the waters. And during that time, fire is absent. So they're using the heavens and the stars, the ether, in order to help navigate to an unknown destination. And then what happens when the crew from the sailboat arrives on their new piece of earth? Well, they celebrate and they build a fire. And so then they can have a ritual fire for arriving at their destination.
And with the fire, they can also cook the food that they need for the sustenance, so that they can get the energy that they need to make the structures in their bodies. Yeah. And physically, like, now I've got to build a house. Now I've got to like dig a hole. Now I've got to like cut wood. Now I've got to make the place ready. It takes a lot of energy. And that takes food. And so there's this beautiful exchange of the elements. They all, each one seems to have a role in it. And I think this is where we try and, I think you were alluding to it earlier, we try and oversimplify the elements. So this element is this element is this element is this. I think there's a lot of crossover and bleeding between the elements, and that they work in a state of cooperation, that there's a cooperative harmony that is driving the elemental flow, if I can use those terms. And that the elemental flow is sort of a reflection of interaction, in the same way that the water cycle, for example, it requires a lot to be happening. It requires the fire, it requires the wind, and then it requires the water, and then it requires the weight and the mass of earth to pull it back down, cooling, to bring it down to its solid, to bring it back down to the earth. So there's all the elements seem to be working in a state of synergy. And I think that it's very difficult to distinguish the elements from each other in a purely altruistic way, because in truth, the elements contain each other. And this is a very interesting point in the tattvas. So the tattvas, there are 25 tattvas. And these 25 tattvas are moving in cycles, as they do. And they're continually recycling and cycling. Now, I've noticed when I watch the water, okay, so I spend a lot of time watching fire and water. I've got a lot of fire and water together in me. Got a watery nature and I've got a fiery nature. Well, I think I've got a balance of elements to a certain degree, but there's for me, the watery element is I've always felt very close to the water. I've always loved to be close to the sea, or close to a river, or be next to a water. I've always been a water baby when I was young as well. And so I've spent much time watching the light on the water and watching it code. And so there's these colors that you can see that's not visible to the naked physical eye, but visible to the etheric eye. The etheric eye isn't a spiritual thing. It's a physical organ that's in the eye that you can see color with. That's, you can see it around people, you can see it around plants. You're actually able to see energy with these physical eyes, because they've got an etheric component to the sense of vision, for example. I think all the senses have got an etheric component to it. And so what I've noticed is when I'm looking at the water, I see these background colors, and they seem to shift quite fast. And there's normally about 3 cycling at once. Sometimes 2 in dominance, Sometimes there's 4 colors. Sometimes it's very busy. Sometimes it's going from an indigo to a blue, and there's a yellow gold coming in. Sometimes the pink is, and they sort of come closer and further away, and they shift. And it seems like there's a few minutes of dominance for each of these. So I would say that there's cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles of these elemental energies changing. And you can see how these colors seem to merge into a pattern of rhythm. And you can see this in many things as well. I mean, even if you watch the aether, if you stare at the sky for a long time and you just allow yourself to contemplate with the eyes open what's happening in the air, it gets very busy. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of vibration, there's a lot of wormholes everywhere. It's a lot of light. It's like watching a light show to a certain extent. But then you start to notice there's also something else. There's this like wind of color that's moving. And this wind of color has got, you think there's one wind of color, but then you notice, hold on, there's another wind underneath that wind, and that wind's fading and this wind's coming into being more. And so these winds are sort of like tones on a guitar playing, and the one vibrational tone is fading and the other one is coming to replace it. And so there's this consistency of tones of vibration and energy that are replacing each other. And there seems to be a few minutes, although I've never really sat down and timed it, because I suppose the act of watching it and timing it might be a different thing. Maybe I need someone else to be sitting with me, or maybe I need to record it. That's what I need to do. And speak to a recorder about what I'm seeing, and then come back later on and make sense out of what time this happened and what time that happened and the color. Probably be a really interesting research. And I think there's been a lot of research in the Tattvic schools of elemental magic, in the Vedic schools, to understanding the tattvas. For example, people take a mirror and they breathe their over a mirror, and depending on the shape that your breath leaves on the mirror, you can inscribe what kind of elemental energies are dominant at that point of time. Or you can look directly into the ether, or you can look over the waters and see these colors changing. So there's a way of reading these elemental shifts, which I think we've sort of lost mostly in modern times, but it's not really that hard to do if one just practices doing it. It's like a muscle. One just needs to learn to flex that muscle. And when one flexes the muscle, the more one flexes it, the more it gets normalized. I don't know. What do you guys think about this notion of reading the elements, dominance, patterns, rhythms?
Mexico had a good comment in the chat, and it made me realize that when I'm working with different individuals and trying to inspire their creative process or shift their energy or way of thinking, then I've kind of got to identify what element maybe they're stuck in, or what element they need to transition into. And then so I kind of try to be the medium in order to help assist them to make that energy move in their own individual journey. And then thinking of like the Western side, I still relate it. It seems like we're very susceptible in the West to burnout, and it's like we're just constantly being fed fire and fire. And then if we continue to do that, like I'm thinking of a forest, well, eventually you're going to burn all of the wood, and you're not going to have any more fuel in order for that fire to continue to burn. So then we would need to take a period of fasting, where we allow, maybe the water comes in and it allows the fire to kind of dwindle down, and allows new growth to come in from the earth, which brings new wood and new trees, which creates a proper fuel to allow new fire to come in and complete the cycle. And so I feel like with maybe the structure of society or our individual practice, at least for me, it's important to identify maybe which element I'm leaning too much into, and then take a period in order to have the entire regrowth process. And also makes me think of the various seasons. I wonder what what element would be corresponding to the various seasons of the earth, winter, summer, spring, fall, that we go through, since it seems like this is something that's kind of reflected in a fractal manner across all of our experiences.
It's an interesting question. I feel like there's a two-folded answer really to it, because for each season there's really there's an element in which it embodies, where it's an element that you kind of have to battle against in some ways, you could say. So like summer, for example, there's like a really hot sun bearing down on you, fire, but you want to go towards the water so you can like relieve yourself from that fire. In the same sense, like in the wintertime, you're being combated with cold air. Jack Frost is coming in, but you want to go towards the fire to warm you. You know what I mean? So, and then we have spring and fall are kind of transitionary seasons where you're going from one extreme to the other. In the spring, I would think earth. But then also you have to have that water component in early spring for the rain to come, for the flowers to bloom, for all that lovely foliage to come in. You have to have that water. And in the fall, you have harvest time. So there's an element of earth there as well. And there's also, I feel like, an element of fire there, and like cooking harvest time, like a lot of baking pies and like fires and roasts and things of the sort. So, but there's unlimited answers to that question. It's a good one though. I like that.
I think that's a rather interesting conversation, how these elements work together and how different the Western schools are from the different schools of thought as they relate to this principle. Because when we consider like these seasons, for example, in the Taoist system, they relate winter to the element of water. In the Western school of occult, we consider winter to be the element of earth because it's crystallizing, ice, snow, whatever. In the Taoist system, we consider summer to be the element of fire, which is universally the element of fire, which is interesting. So our fire doesn't move around, fire doesn't change. When we consider in the Western school spring as the element of air, new breath of life, and we consider the element of water as being the autumn, which is interesting. Those autumn rains that you get before winter. Now, when you're looking in the Taoist system, you're looking at the water element being winter. Then you've got the wood element and you've got the metal element. The metal element, I think, is autumn, which is interesting when you look at that in that way. Or have I got that wrong? Is the metal element autumn? Yes, the metal element is autumn and the wooden element is spring. So they've got like a very different way of considering these elements. If you think about it right down, like they take the seasons and they break them down into air, water, and fire. And earth in the Taoist system is considered to be the changing of the elements. That's a very different way of looking at things, isn't it? I don't think any of them are wrong. I think it's a different way of understanding alchemical principles. What do you guys think with the notion of these ideas?
Did you say that winter was associated with earth?
in Western occult circles, winter would be associated with Earth. And
Okay, I could see that, like the evergreen and stuff is celebrated.
yeah, because like in summer, the water evaporates.
Mm.
In winter, it crystallizes. In autumn, it falls from the sky. And in spring, you get that warming winds, don't you?
Mm.
You get the breeze, spring breeze, that helps to cross-pollinate the flowers, no?
Spring is
The
also
flowers
kind of
come
the
and they go.
storm season, right? Like
Sorry?
spring is where we've got like tornadoes and hurricanes and a lot of other things that are going on that we don't see in the other seasons. It's like a chaotic, transition.
Mhm.
Spring has definitely got a lot going on. So when you think of it in terms of metal, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like metal is pretty hard. There's no messing around with metal. Yeah. It's not like nice and gentle and bendy like wood. Wood's like la 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 la. Metal is like clank, 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 clank. And when you get hit by the metal reality, it's hard and it's cold. It's clinical. But then when we look at Western cosmological principles, it's very interesting because they actually give the Earth an element. And Eleanor mentioned, Mexico mentioned earlier, the pentagram, star. And so when we're looking at the 5 elements, when we consider it in terms of a Western cosmological symbol, we're looking at the number 5, right? But when we're looking at the 5 elements from a Taoist perspective, we're looking at the number 4. There's almost a contradiction of terms there, isn't there? I put it down to that the Taoists are looking at the mystic nature of the elements. So they're looking at the number 4, as 4 is the mystic number of 5. Where in the Western schools of occult, we're looking at the actual elements. And here's something that I noticed, which is very interesting. So in the fire element, okay, from the Taoist system, you got the heart and you got the small intestine. And those relate to summer and they relate to the heart, the energy of the heart and fire. And that fire element is, it's all about passion and impatience and like volatile energies to a certain degree, and agitation and excitement, all of these sort of emotional relations. Then you've got two organs. You've got the heart and the small intestine. The heart is the circulator of plasma around the body, keeping the timing for all the other elements. And the small intestine is what essentially absorbs nutrition and water, fundamentally. Then you've got the wood element, which is the liver and the gallbladder. And the liver is the cleansing element. The gallbladder, I think, is rather fundamental. What exactly does the gallbladder do? This has always been something which has been an interesting perspective to me, because I think there's a lot more to the gallbladder than what we're told in medicine. And it's fascinating because the gallbladder, okay, there's such a thing as gall. Like, look at the gall of that. So it's supposed to be, if you've got a lot of gall, you've got a lot of guts. You've got a lot of gumph. But it's supposed to be all about the digestion of fats, right? It's supposed to be about the breaks down fats and it holds fats, the gallbladder. So you can see how there seems to be some kind of a relationship between the gallbladder and the small intestine, between fire and wood. And the liver purifies the blood that the heart beats around. So the heart and the small intestine of the fire element are supported. The heart supported by the liver, and the small intestine supported by the gallbladder. And the small intestine also sends a lot of the fats probably to the gallbladder, I imagine. Then you got the water element, where you got the kidneys and the bladder, the urinary bladder. And like it's just dealing with, in the same way that the gallbladder and the liver is all about, like, what is it about? Fear and um, um,
Grief.
I think grief relates more to the lungs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think grief relates more to the lungs. But the idea of the anger, which is related to the liver, I know that anger breaks down your liver. Anger makes your liver weaker. And anger is like anger, which is related to angst, which is an expression of anxiousness and anxious energy. But anxiety is related to your stomach. So anxiousness causes ulcers, right? If you're anxious, you get ulcers. So this anger of the liver and the gallbladder, the liver and the gallbladder both get weakened by anger, I believe. Then you've got the water element, where you've got the movement of the fluids around. You've got the kidneys that are supposed to be a big part of the nutrification of the blood. They also, I think, play a role in the cleansing of the blood. They play an important role in the maintenance of temperature in the body, as does the liver, I think. And then you've got this metal element of the lungs and the large intestine, where the lungs is what's pulling in the prana and oxygenating the blood and removing the CO2, very important. So it's a very much passing through both ways. Then you got the large intestine, which is like largely digestive, some level of absorption, I think, not as much assimilation as with the small intestine, but a lot of digestion. For example, dairy products and milk is exclusively digested in your large intestine, not even in your stomach, just goes right through. But foods, I think, go through different stages of digestion and preparation for the absorption. And it starts possibly at the lower reaches of the long intestine, and then gets into the small intestine, where it's sucking out all the fluids and the last of the nutrients and the salts. And so dehydration basically damages your small intestine, which is like opening up to bowel cancer, for example. And so when we look at this, like there's this interplay here, what we were getting at before. The large intestine and the kidney, there seems to be some kind of a connection, you know, to do with the breaking down of things. The kidneys also play, I think, an important role in maintaining the blood flow through the organs, if I'm not mistaken. So the blood's got to be conditioned. I think the kidneys plays an important role in the conditioning of the blood, as does the liver, purifying the blood. Then we've got the earth element with the spleen and the stomach. Now, the spleen is all about your mental activity, like warring, the warrior, the spleen. And the stomach is all about being anxious. So if you worry a lot, you become more anxious. And so that relates to building a solid frame around you of safety. The earth element, finances, worrying about money, worrying about what you're going to have, food enough, worrying about what the weather's going to do, worrying about how your crops are going to grow or what's going to fail, what can go wrong. It's got a lot to do with material survival, which relates, I think, to the earth element. So you can see there's this interesting little interplay going on here, you know. And but what caught me was that these organs, you got the spleen and the stomach of the earth element, you got the lung and the large intestine of the metal element, you've got the kidney and the bladder of the water element, you've got the wood of the liver and the gallbladder, and you've got the fire, heart, and the small intestine. Now, what we've got there is 10. 10. Okay, that's very interesting. Because when I look at that, I look at the 5 planets, right? Now, from a Taoist perspective, we're looking at it doesn't quite add up with the Western cosmological model from my perspective. Because, okay, firstly, the sun and moon are not present. So the sun has nothing to do with fire, which is interesting in itself. Mars is the one that relates to fire. Then the water, I believe, relates to Jupiter. Am I right or wrong? Is water relating to Jupiter? No, water relates to Mercury. Sorry. Wood relates to Jupiter because wood draws the water up into it. That's correct. And the water relates to Mercury. That's bipolar. That water has that, what's that called? Diamagnetic potential and quality to it, which I think is symbolized by Mercury. And then we've got the element of earth, which is obviously Saturn. Saturn, the earth, solid, the reaping of the earth with the sky, as we see it in Western cosmology. And we've got the metal that is related to Venus, which is in itself quite interesting. Venus we think of as being related to harmony, but metal to me seems disharmonious. But there is something to the way these things are allocated. And so we've got these 5 planetary potentials, but each one has 2 prongs. Now, when you look at those 5 planetary potentials, they each have 2 signs, right? Mercury has got Virgo and Gemini. Jupiter's got Pisces and Sagittarius. Saturn has got Capricorn and Aquarius. Mars has got Aries and Scorpio. Venus has got Libra and Taurus. Have I mentioned all 5? I think I've mentioned all 5. And so that's 10. And the sun and the moon create the head and the tail of the Ouroboros. So the sun only has its place in Leo, no other. And the moon only has its place in Cancer. But Cancer and Leo become a polarity for each other in the same way that each of the other planets has 2 polarizing, which is rather interesting as a consideration. So they then have these 10 organs that they relate to the other 5. That means there must be 2 organs left over relating to the sun and the moon. But the sun must only have 1 organ and the moon must have 1 organ, which I think is an interesting consideration, something in itself to take a look at. Because where's the brain? Did I mention the brain? Oh, that's not an organ. It's not important. I think the brain could qualify as a fairly important organ, especially in humans, since we rely on it a lot. And did we miss the reproductive organs here anywhere? We didn't come up with the reproductive. So we've got the brain and we've got the reproductive organs. And the moon, I think the womb, the moon, relating to the reproductive organs does make more sense, if that makes sense, as holding the potential of life, the waters of the womb. And the sun being that symbol of light that dawns upon us, the dawn of a new idea, the dawn of a new philosophy, the dawn of enlightenment. The sun could relate to the brain. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there. What do you guys think of this as a model? I don't think it's written down in this way. I mean, the Taoist 10 are, but then to bring the zodiac to its fullness, we need to consider Leo and Cancer. What do you guys think?
I think so. When you were talking about the Eastern, the Taoist, they were looking for more of the mystic nature of the elements, and so I was thinking more of like the relationship, the internal look, which would lead me to some of the relationships between the different elements and our internal organs. And then when I think of the West, it was more of like how to utilize the different elements to expand the mission. I'm thinking Western expansion, manifest destiny, conquer, and then also more of a scientific focus where we're like chopping it up into smaller and smaller pieces and like how to experiment and mix things together. And the West almost seems to like take some of the insight from the East, looking at the organs and maybe what element they relate to, and then almost take their model and attack the different organs or like the energy centers. And so one of the things in some of the groups I'm in recently would be related to like addiction, and so we talked about the liver being anger. Well, it's a time where I think a lot of people in the West have a lot of anger, and then so that would be relating to attacking the liver with alcohol or with maybe substances that are going to maybe suppress or generate, intentionally the different kind of energies that they're working for in the West. Again, same thing, manifest destiny, expansion, pushing. And then the East seems to kind of go back to rebalancing that. And so I'm seeing a little bit more like right now where people are wanting to take more ownership or have sovereignty again over their body and spirit. And so they're recognizing these different maybe attacks on different organs or energy centers. And then they're taking responsibility to cultivate and feed their energy centers or organs the proper nutrients in order to recover maybe from some of the results of Western type actions.
I think that's a really lovely insight, and I think there's definitely this different perspective between the East and the, well, we can't say East and West, the Taoist and the Western, maybe, because India has got its own ideas. In India, we like things to be more colorful. They like colorful, exciting adventure. India's got to be the most colorful place I've ever been in my life. I'll tell you something. If you like colorful places, go and spend time in India. The colors of and the smells. Oh my gosh. The smells and the colors of India are just overwhelmingly. It's a very sensuous place. And which is interesting. China must be a very passionate place. Because the cosmology of the Tao is a very, let's tone it down. Let's bring the water in. Let's be like water. Let's calm down. Which is a big part of the Taoist. So that must be trying to bring the water, bring down that passion, which must be a big part of the Chinese culture. Must be a highly impassioned culture. It must be. I mean, you don't get to be 2.2 billion people without passion, right? It's got to be a lot of passion in the bedroom for that to happen, because like that population has rocked it. So, the men and the women have definitely been passionate. But and India is pretty close to that. But India is more about the sensuous, It's all a sensuous trip, which is interesting. They love their milk sweets and their elaborately rich food in India, right? Lots of ghee and paneer and all these lovely, rich kind of nutritional foods that the Indian people love, which is quite interesting. But yeah, there's definitely this shift in the West, I think, to break everything down. Is that a good way of putting it? We want to break everything down to its common denominators. We want to simplify everything to an extreme almost. And I think the Taoists are much more interested in putting things together, building things up. What do you think? Building things up, breaking things down, is that a good way of looking at it?
I agree. I think I'm going to sit and listen just for a little while. I'm out of my notes. Maybe Cosmic wants to jump in with something.
I'm just listening at the moment.
It's all good, brother. I just didn't want to be the one talking the whole time. But it's like I want everybody to have a chance and to be part of the flow. I think that when we look at these elemental states, and now I'm getting into the elemental states, I think something interesting Mexico mentioned was take a little breath with me. So let's look at the breath cycle. Oh, Indy. What have we got here?
Talking about oversimplify things and trying to break them all down. There's here an association of different elements of the food. with the different elements of the Chinese breakdown. So they have fire associated with bitter, and I think they're not saying spicy, but they do have chili pepper up there, which is interesting. Earth is associated with sweet. Metal is associated with spicy. Water associated with salty, and wood associated with sour. And I don't know. I think that's interesting. I feel like fire should be spicy. Um, I don't know. I would almost put sweet with water and salty with earth. But it's pretty interesting. You know, there's so many ways to go about it. And I feel like one of the good aspects of the ways the Chinese have broken it down is that they're not just saying that it's one process. They have a integrated dynamic kind of component where these aspects create each other, and then they also they destroy each other in different ways, and then they have aspects of they insult other ones that destroy them. So there's a multifaceted aspect of relationships between these elements here, which is good. There's definitely an oversimplification here of things. And I know that part of the system of the Chinese understanding with the yin and the yang within the yin and the yin within the yang is knowledge that there's everything is within everything, and there's opposites of each element within the element itself. So I think that's already acknowledged in a paradoxical line of thinking in the East, but it's not as well acknowledged in the West, and sometimes hard for us to process or comprehend.
Where would you put like oil? So I'm thinking we cook a lot of food in various oils, whether it's like a olive oil or oil that's derived from animal fat, and then also like I'm thinking the spinal type fluid or kind of like a oil from the spine. What is this? The sacred secretion of oil. I don't. Is that more like an ether type element? And that's what I don't know.
I would say, yeah, that is definitely an ether type of element, or at least it's an element that allows us to access the ether. It's like the portal to the ether. So you could also maybe associate it with like the waters, the sacred divine waters, potentially as well, healing waters. But I think cooking oil, I know that we would probably not associate oil with water because they kind of separate and they're opposites. And as far as cooking oils, I would think maybe along the side of wood or earth, potentially. It comes from vegetation.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And what you mentioned about the sweet flavor, I think the reason the Taoists associate sweet with earth is because the spleen. So the spleen and the pancreas have got a relationship. And so they don't mention the pancreas here, but we consider the pancreas as the driver of the stomach. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Stomach's driver. Well, I think that's a good way of looking at it. So we're talking about the stomach essentially. And the pancreas is obviously really important because this is where our sugar metabolism is controlled, but this is driven by the spleen. So when we eat sugars, for example, it affects the spleen. It has big effects on the spleen, and the spleen is what tells the system whether we should be storing sugars in our fats, right? Storing sugar, or whether we should be burning sugar. So the spleen has got a big role in driving the metabolism. And so eating sugar tells the spleen to store energy, which makes you get physically heavier and bigger, if that makes sense. So the sweet flavor, if you eat sweet things, you put on weight, no? Like you just you become just solid earth. Where sour does the opposite. I think eating sour things makes you lose weight, if that makes sense. And eating bitter things cleanses the blood. And eating pungent flavors, what they call pungent, is like very much to do with spiciness. I think that causes the metabolism to also kick up, drives the metabolism. So earth is the one element that puts on and tells the spleen tells the pancreas how to metabolize the sugar, and that was going to affect what your body does, whether it's storing nutrients or burning nutrients. I think that's what the sweet flavor is related to. But it's very interesting because I don't think it's so clear cut. I think it relates. I think when we talk about those flavors elementally, I think we're talking about specific organs, and those organs just happen to have an elemental nature, if that makes sense. So I think when we're talking about sugar, we're talking about the spleen and how that programs the pancreas. When we're talking about a bitter flavor, we're talking about how that affects our what will that be? Is that the gallbladder? Is the bitter the gallbladder? Is that right? Is the bitter flavor related to the gallbladder?
Fire relates to heart, and
bitter relates to the heart.
small intestine. Yeah.
Cleansing the blood. That's right. Cleansing the blood. Bitter relates to the heart. Cleansing the blood, purifying the bringing the toxins out of our system. So bitter basically tends to activate the liver in a sense, but it makes the blood more pure. So that's going to affect the heart and how the heart's going to operate. So I think it's really interesting the way these all sort of run into each other, because I don't think it's just one thing. And isn't it interesting how bitterness is an emotion carried by the heart?
Mm-hmm.
See? So one can have bitterness in one's heart. So we can see that flavor of bitterness has got something to do with the heart. And too much of the bitterness can make you bitey, make you want to bit. Oh, I bit you. He's a bitter. That one's a bitter. He bites people, So we could see like probably the etymology of these words are relating to being bitey, and that fiery passion of the heart can make one highly volatile. But it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know where I stand exactly, because in the Vedic school of thoughts, we have a different way of looking at it. But it's the same, even though it's different. It's that Akash that isn't accounted for in the Taoist system. And I think in the Taoist system, the reason Akash isn't accounted for is because the Akash is put into the earth. What do you guys think about that as a notion?
I was thinking about what Aaron was talking about, how like the Western culture is all this very kind of like this driven, overly rationalizing, simply getting to the point. And one of the things I'm kind of comparing like the Western elements to the Eastern elements, and I'm kind of noticing that the way we put the elements together actually kind of explains the way our cultural mindset works. So one thing I'm noticing about the Eastern system, the 5-element system, is it lacks the element of air. And in the Western system, air represents intellect as being hyper rational, hyper intellectual. And I'm kind of it's interesting that there's a cultural overlap, because the West is thought to be this very intellectual thing because it emphasizes the air element, whereas the East seems to not really emphasize the air element at all. Instead, it replaces it with let's say, wood and metal, which I always kind of find interesting because in a way it's also kind of like in the Western system, every Earth kind of just subsumes like metal and wood. It sees it as a part of itself. So it's almost most interesting. I've been really thinking about, like, if you think about different universes having different laws of physics, it's almost kind of like, in a way, different, spiritual systems have different composite elements that create the universe it's structured on. So it's more like the East is almost like its world is based on 5 elements, and our sort of, egregoric sort of zeitgeist in the West is based on 4 elements. So it's almost like, in a weird way, if you can kind of see what each culture's basic elements are, you can kind of almost get a kind of an anthropological survey of kind of like what the psychological cultural milieu of that culture is. That's the thing about the West, and the idea of air and being kind of like that emphasized. And it's kind of like Eastern culture about, and Taoism, it's about sort of going with the flow and, not really think, because even if you think about most like martial arts or any kind of like dance or skill, the more you have to think about something, generally the worse you are at it. Like, people, when you're really good at some kind of skill, it's usually it just comes automatically because you practice so much. It's almost like they kind of like, they don't value that, and thus the element of air, and thus the culture, and it's sort of, it almost creates a different universe, a different operating system, because of the basic structure it's made with.
Yeah, I find it interesting that they break this down in traditional Chinese medicine to associate with the different organs in this way, because it's different in Ayurveda. They kind of break it down, instead of into 5, but into 3 different components or doshas. And the doshas being vata or air, pitta or fire, kapha or water, are associated with respectively sour and bitter, spicy and sweet. So I know, like, for a pitta dosha, which is a fire Ayurvedic body type, you're supposed to avoid spicy food because it can be a weakness if you have too much passion, fury, anger. The spice can aggravate that. So it's interesting how they kind of put sour and bitter together, associate that with air. And so air is very intense, energetic, kind of windswept around. And so sour and bitter is very motivating. And so the sour and bitter, to take less of that, can help them settle down and calm down more instead of moving about so much. And for kapha, for them, they're naturally sweet, and kind of more heavy set. And so eating sweets is not necessarily in their favor. They need to kind of avoid the sweets and being sedentary. So if they can have less sweets and maybe have more fire and more spicy and more sour, that would help them motivate and get up and move around a little bit more and do a little bit more, be more active. So I think it's interesting how the 2 dynamics of the Ayurvedic and the traditional Chinese medicine have different takes on the different elements, but there's also a lot of good insights to both sides.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, from a Vedic perspective, I am Pitta Kapha.
Mm.
I think I'm 60% Pitta, 40% Kapha. And like, what I should be eating a lot of is leaves. I should eat a lot of leaves. I should eat a fair whack of fruits, nuts, seeds. Very much a vegetarian diet is correct for my doshas. Some doshas, they say people should eat a little bit of meat. Interesting, in Ayurveda. And by a little bit of meat, they mean like, once in 2 weeks, like a piece. But It's fascinating, like looking at how these elements come together in our bodies. You know, um, I do think that they probably seem different on the surface, but I think they're looking at a different perspective. Because when they're speaking about the kapha, right? It contains within it water, but it also contains within it earth as well, in a sense, right? It's that that moves towards inertia. Where the vata is what Cosmic was talking about. The neurological group consciousness of the Western mindset is very much a vata one. It's a very airy, neurotic. We're very neurotic people, aren't we? In the West, extremely neurotic. Like when you go to India, it's incredible to watch Indian people. They're just sitting down waiting. It's like as a Westerner, it's frustrating. It's like, so when's the train coming? It's coming. What do you mean it's coming? It's coming. When? It's coming. That's all they need to know. It's coming. That's fine. It's good. Doesn't matter. 1 hour, half hour, 10 minutes, 2 hours. It's coming. Westerners, we need to know, like, what time's that train going to be here? Where am I going to get to? What time am I going to go? You know, we've got a very neurotic way of dealing with the world. I think that's sort of what Cosmic was getting at. Or am I wrong, Cosmic?
More or less.
And so I think that relates to the Vata mindset. But then if we relate that neurosis, that neurotic, that relates to the spleen as well. Right? So the spleen is that, because neurosis, overthinking everything makes you want to worry a lot. So maybe we worry more in the West than what we need to. And so there's more of a propensity towards, sanguine. Thanks for the lovely word, Mexico. But yeah, there's this over mental preoccupation with the outcome of events, I think, in the West. And I think a lot of our society has been triggered and geared towards this notion. And so we tend to be so extremely, what's the word? Overly concerned with control, which is quite interesting. And if you look at what that represents, it represents basically the mind's ability to interface with things, which is really an airy element. So we are also more imaginative because of this, which is interesting, if that makes sense. The downside of neurosis is the downside of neurosis. The upside of neurosis is you come up with new ideas because your brain is so bloody active. You know, the imagination gets so overactive because part of anxiousness and anxiety is an overactive imagination. You know, you imagine and everything's more than what it is. And so, like, I have a lot of people coming to me and they've got anxiety and they worry about what this person's thinking about them, or, you know, because of this, it means this. And you got to stop them and go, no, that's your own anxiety. You are, you know, attaching all of these meanings to things that other people are doing based upon your own neurological, and your imagination is filling in the gaps. And you're imagining that everything that people say is somehow related to you when it's not. People are just doing their own thing, expressing themselves in their own worlds, and it's very often has very little to do with you, but then you take it on yourself. That is something I think that we do in the West very, very often. We want to over-relate everything to ourselves, which makes us a little bit self-absorbed. Over-concern and control is the lack of control and trust. Yeah, I think the lack of trust is a big part of it. Something I noticed, a lot more trust in India, right? Like in the West, we don't have trust. In India, there seems to be a lot more trust in things and even in each other. People will park their bike and leave the keys in the bike. just trusting that no one's going to ride off with it. It took me a while to learn to leave the keys in my bike. I was like, okay, I'm going to try this when I leave the keys in my bike. This is how this is done. That way you can't lose your key. And believe it or not, it works. You can't pull that off in the West because, I think because of our over neurotic nature, someone will come past and be overly neurotically looking at the bike. Oh, there's a key in the bike. What does that mean? Oh, yeah, I think, though, at the same time, I think in China, there's also something going on. People seem to be very easily linked into a group mind and have their individuality expunged. If that makes sense. It seems to have happened there quite easily. I mean, it's happening globally at the moment, isn't it? But I mean, whatever happened in China, they seem to have really locked everybody in. And the systems in China are the systems that we are becoming worried about happening here. Where you get this, what is it? Points system. Right? It's like a driver's license, man. You win and lose points. In China, if you cross the road and you don't walk on the stripes and you don't go with where you're supposed to cross the road, the cameras will see you and they will take some of your points away. And if you lose a certain number of points, you're not allowed a bank account. Just how does that work? How do you get a group of people to be like, yeah, we're good with that. That's fine. We'll do that. And if you ask the local people who live there, they go, no, that's fine. We must follow the rules. But in the West, we're like, rules were made to be broken. We don't have to follow all the rules. I mean, not when you're crossing the road. I mean, come on, you cross the road where you cross the road. You don't have to go looking for a road crossing to cross the road. In China, you do. So there's an interesting different perspective there. And I think that in the Vedic system, in the Indian system, it's even more of a creative element. It's the most creative that I've come across. I'll never forget how I lost my key while riding my bike. Okay, so it fell out of my bike while I was riding. This is a ridiculous story. And I'm like, what do I do? So I'm driving around and I'm asking people what do I do? I've lost my key for my bike. They're like, how the hell do you lose your key for the bike? I don't know. It was in there when I started riding and it fell out while I was riding. And I found this guy on the side of the road. This was in Udaipur. And if you go to Udaipur, the city, okay, anybody is ever traveling through Udaipur, if you lose your key while you're riding, you got to go to where the main clock tower is. It's about half a kilometer from Jagdish Temple, right into the most central place where there's the big circle. Is it called? No, it's not called Connaught. I can't remember what it's called, but it's where the main clock tower is. And there's all the markets there. There's a lot of markets leading off of there. There's 4 different market roads leading off of there. And there's people there doing shoe shines. And there's a little guy who sits there. And he can do anything with his hands. You can rock up with your engine running, and he'll be like, don't worry. I'll be like, what do you mean, don't worry? He said, no, you have to keep the engine running. So I turned off the engine. And he took a piece of metal and a file, and he made me a key. I was just like, wow, I'm humbled. This guy put a piece of metal in there and he filed it. He put the piece of metal in and he filed it. And he put it, before I knew it, there I was. I had a key. I was like, that's so cool. I can take this piece of metal and have a key cut from it. Which I did. And I've always had a spare key after that. Just my point is you won't find people doing that in the West. In India, if a motorbike breaks down, do you know what people do? They take their bloody shoelace off. And they fix the bike with a shoelace. And you're watching this, you're thinking these guys are nuts. But they'll fix it with a shoelace. They'll take it apart, see what's wrong, fix it with a shoelace, get back on and ride off. So they haven't lost their natural creative impulse, which I think we've lost because of our overly vata nature. I think, what do you think? Creativity, where does that stand in the spectrum?
I think air, imagination, air is often associated with creativity, freedom of thought. I think water can also be associated with the flowing of water, movement of water, movement of the imagination can carry you. Yeah, imagination is powerful. Also, fire, there's an element of fire to the imagination. The fire of the imagination is like the fire of creativity, the light and the fire that guide the forging of like new things. So that's definitely an element as well.
So that's
I
rather
like
interesting.
the motorbike stories. I think the East is definitely a little more reflective of using what you have, maintaining things, just kind of fixing it just to, it's going to all be okay as long as I can just get where I need to go for today, and I'll worry about tomorrow. Where West is a lot more create something brand new, gather a lot of resources, reinvent, very much a little bit more innovative, and maybe like destroy old things and rebuild new things in a more efficient manner versus like East. I see more of a preservation of like a ancient history and art and the way things were previously done. And the motorbike story was also reminding me that there's almost a little bit of a like an East and West split in the United States. And so I come from more of the Southwest, and it seems like the more west you go in the U.S., especially where I lived, because I lived in a location in the Southwest where it's the highest theft rate of automobiles in the entire United States. And so I had a lot of um, I had my truck and motorcycle stolen. And the idea of just like leaving your key in your motorbike is just, it's unheard of over there. And then when I moved more towards the southeastern US, it became more of, oh, we just leave our doors open, a little more friendly. Everything's going to be okay. There's not really the level of theft where like in the Southwest I had the anxiety of, oh, I've got to have all these security measures, make sure to worry about somebody coming to steal or raid my property and the things that I've worked for. I'd have security cameras, and on my vehicles we're putting all these steering wheel locks, brake locks, and all of these preventive measures because it's just common that you're going to get your stuff stolen and raided, and that creates even more fear and anxiety and worry. And then going more towards like the western part of the US, it's also a lot more desert, and so there's the lack of water. It's more heat and fire, and then also a little bit higher altitude as well. And they're not really like, they're more like super steep peak mountains, and the land is also already really high versus like in the southeastern US. There's mountains, but they're a little more rolling, lower altitude. It's not as sharp as an ascent, and so it's kind of like the western concentration of the neurotic type head energy is also reflective of the landscape as well. And the east, where I'm at, it's a little more like a temperate rainforest. There's a lot more water, there's more humidity, and it shifts kind of the energy of the individual and then also the collective group. And so that's part of kind of like my own migration, starting on the west side, and then having to reground myself, move all of my head energy, become more of an earth water type element instead of just fire and air. Because growing up, I definitely, ever since I was a little kid, I just remember like the energy focus just felt like it was always trapped in the mind, which I think is great for analysis and generating new ideas, but it can't stay there. It needs to be able to move and flow. Otherwise it does seem like it gets a little more crystallized and trapped and imprisoned kind of control type structure.
Yeah, that whole East and West division is rather interesting. Well, when I consider the elements, okay, so from a Western occult school of thinking, fire is the ignition. And so the ignition of fire is the inspiration. And so the inspiration that we get is what drives our thoughts. So I would put imagination as being that fiery element of inspiration that is the fuel for thoughts to move with, to create out of it. And then I think of how, the fiery element is also one of the life principle, the warmth, the hot life energy coming into us, into our flow of our bodies. Cosmic's just said bye-bye. He had to go out. So this whole energy of inspiration and fire. The fire gives us the heat that flows through our hearts, and our blood warms us up. And then the air element is the communication aspect, that connector, if you will, that acts as a communicator between the fire and the water. And so the principle of thinking and planning. You see, we say the word thinking, and to me that's misleading, because there's different types of thinking. Like there's different types of thought experience. So it's like a very broad spectrum. But when I think of the air element, I think of it as the principle of ideas that can connect to other ideas, the connecting ideas, the plans that can connect me to the future that I want, my desires, the plans that can connect me to that, the ways that I can express what I'm feeling to connect me to you, that idea of thoughts. So the ideas, I think, relate to the air element, to a sense. And then when I think of the water element, I think of the principle of reflection. And so when you're reflecting upon something, you're meditating upon it. In Rosicrucian schools of meditation, well, how Rosicrucian have interesting schools of meditation. When the Rosicrucians speak of meditation, they're not speaking of dhyana. They're speaking of contemplation, almost. And contemplation is to allow the mind to dwell upon something, which is a rather interesting kind of thinking. Where the mind to dwell on something and to sort of churn it, like water churns in a river, until new possibilities are revealed. And so it produces a sense of reflection. We reflect upon an idea. So the idea of the air, we then reflect upon it. That's the water element, as I imagine it. And then this is also a sense of it engenders passion. Let me give you an example. Let's say somebody did something to tick you off, and you reflect upon that, right? When you reflect upon it, you're going to end up getting annoyed with that person. It's going to bring the passion into your heart. And it's going to make you become more annoyed with that person the more you reflect upon it, until you resolve that annoyance and it becomes released. So there's an interesting watery element in this churning of the passions. And the passions is the passing of the ions, and the ions are bound in the water. And the water holds the ions. And so there's this very interesting way in which water and all the salts and all the elements dissolve into the water. And It becomes the matrix of our blood, for example. And then the earth I see as the anal eyes. Come on, give us those anal eyes. A little bit of the anal eyes. So it's that looking at things from brass tacks, comparing this to this and that. And to analyze things is to go through each detail and to look at each detail painstakingly and to consider each detail as part of the structure until you get to the bottom line. So, like, I see analysis as being an earth element. I see reflection and contemplation as being water element. Contemplation is moving towards the earth element from the water element. Then I see the idea of thinking and generating ideas as the air element, connecting the dots. Then the inspiration is the fire. And the inspiration of the fire. So this means that emotion, what is energy motion, is in our hearts. And it's related to the fire element. So when we read these books, what they talk about, the Vedic emotion is related to the Svadhisthana chakra, which is the second chakra from the base chakra. I think that there's a translation issue here. I think that the passions are connected to the Svadhisthana chakra in the way that the passions become ionized and churned by the reflection upon something. If you reflect upon what your goal is over and over and over again, you'll become very passionate about achieving your goal. But the true emotion is something that produces heat in your heart. So when you're hyper emotional, you're hot-headed. You're not cool, calm, and collected. But when you're cool, calm, and collected, you're sort of focused in a sense because you've reflected upon something deeply. You're cool and calm and connected. You're in control. So water represents a certain element of control. Fire represents a certain element of a loss of control. It's a powerful churning, and it's burning, and it's like this hotness in me. I've got to express it. Where the water is, I've got to contain it. I've got to consider it, all the different reflections of this thing that I can consider. Observe it without interfering with it too much so that I can just get the general lay of it, the general shape of it. And the earth element then becomes that sort of logistics, the logistics of it. And so the logos, logistics, is related to the Muladhara chakra, which is the anus. And so that's why you say someone is anal. They're anal because they want to know the facts. They want to analyze things and get down to the brass tacks and everything. They're not happy to have, I think in the West, we're very anal because we're very in our root chakra. What would you guys say to that as a concept? Like adding on to what you were saying, Aaron, about how in the West we tend to, be a control freak.
You mentioned Earth as being kind of the anal analysis. Earth definitely as a container. I see it as kind of almost digesting and recycling all of the other elements, and oil even kind of comes to mind as well. I also liked the passions as ions, and it reminds me of like when I have the heart and the fire and the passions, then I just want to kind of express everything. I just want to explode, just be, just allow everything just to come out of me and just let those ions just go out into the world. And then also, like, for fire, I've always got to kind of fan the flame. So the passions are very much kind of, it's something I've got to continue to fan the flame. And I'm thinking kind of like as of relationships, in order to keep the passion alive, the fire has to continually be fan the flame, breathe air, breathe life into it to ensure that it doesn't go out. And it's not something you can just do by yourself. It's both parties that need to breathe continuous life, air, fire into the relationship. And then it also, I was at a baseball game for the 4th of July, and it was a good showcase of Western people in regards to how they dance, because like the baseball game will be playing and they'll have like the dance camera, kind of go on, and then the Western people are kind of, you can tell they're like suppressing all of their ions. They don't have like the passion to just move into dance and just be taken away in the trance and just be, and just like, almost the demonic type possession of dance, which is like how I like. But the Western people are all kind of more like robotic. They're like, look at me, I'm doing the dance. And, and they're just very strange and compartmentalized with their level of expression versus, I don't know about East, but I'm thinking of like when I like ecstatic dance and like real passion and just letting go. You can't put a container on that. It's just, you've just got to blend with it and just let it go and flow. And that's just a completely different energetic experience where I couldn't, be in my headspace and be all anal and hyperactive and worried about how other people think about me. And if I'm truly wanting to be expressive and dancing, I've just got to let all the ions and passion flow out of me.
Yeah, it's interesting how the ions are carried out of us by our urine. I think our urine carries a lot of the ions out of us. And so it's like a deionizer, which is rather interesting. I think it's one of the reasons why drinking the urine is quite interesting, because you're putting the ions back, right? And like I had to put that in there. Put the ions back. Put the ion. And in Rastafari, they say ion. Yeah? And the ion is literally what they're talking about, is the ions, which is quite interesting, And I see there's cool comments coming out here. I do think that also when we look at these elements, when I consider the fifth element, the Akash. So, okay, let's look at the Vedic. The Akash is the Visuddhi chakra from the Vedic perspective. And that is where the Shashumna comes into its own. The Shashumna is the resolution between the currents of the Ida and the Pingala. The Ida and the Pingala are swaying one way or the other. The Pingala is a very neurologically focused attention, and the Ida is a very emotionally dispersed attention. No, awareness, emotionally dispersed awareness, as opposed to mentally focused attention. I think that's a good way of distinguishing between the Ida and the Pingala, in a sense, if you want to use words to draw these distinctions. And so there's a point where attention merges between awareness and experience of why is my brain going? My brain's going like awareness. What's the other one? What is, you've got your awareness, which is your field, then you've got your field of focused, where your attention falls. What would we call that? I can't believe I can't think of this word. It's like one of the most common English words that there is. So you've got the awareness and perception. Perception. So your perception is, Ori, please lie down. Come, lie down. This Malamute, when he walks around, he's got these huge feet, like doof, 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 doof. and he's trying to figure out where he wants to lie. He goes and lies there. He gets up there. He doesn't want to lie there. He goes to lie there. Now he's gone to settle. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, I think you can. I hope you can see it. He's going to settle on the chair behind me. He's sitting up there now. He's hilarious. This dog is a classic. Can you see the chair? Anyway, I think you can. But yeah, so that the perception is the instrument of focus and creating the one frame of reality, and then another frame of reality, and another frame of reality, another frame, and the awareness is like that line that ties the frames of reality together to create this dream time, experiential, from one moment to another. So the perception distinguishes one moment from another, and the awareness binds them together in a train of thought. I like the sound of that. That's a good one. Hashtag Bush Whisperer. And so the idea of perception and awareness, at which point are perception and awareness not separate? At which point are perception and awareness singular? In a state of unified experience. That's quite an interesting concept. I think that's what represents the Sushumna. And before the perception has been drawn forth from the awareness. And so the perception is what creates a distinction between you and me, for example. And the awareness is what connects me to you. Isn't that interesting? So the one draws a distinction of separation, and the other one draws a cohesive. And the awareness is a feminine trait. The perception is a masculine trait, as I see it. And so the perception leads to judgments. The awareness leads to impressions. The impressions of the awareness will drive the judgments of the perception. So they're like two cogs of a bicycle wheel moving in synergy together. And so when the perception and the awareness have not been removed from each other, what do we have? I think that's a state of pure consciousness. Pure consciousness, just being conscious, but without distinction. I think, was it you, Aaron, that mentioned the other day that when you're listening to words, but you can't distinguish the meaning of the words? Or was that Indy?
I don't think it was me.
Like, it's something I used to do a lot of. Like when you're listening to the birds, for example, and it works both ways. If you listen
No, it
to
was
the
me.
bunch,
It was me.
yeah, it was you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was because I was describing how two different phenomena. So one, when I work at a large factory, how there's all of the different sounds. So like when I first went into a new factory, then it's like it seems like chaotic. There's just like this machine running, this one machine running, and it's just too much. And then eventually all of the rhythm and the sounds start to blend to become one singular sound. And then the only thing that I can hear is anything that's dissonant from the normal course of the rhythm, which then causes the awareness, I guess, to turn into a focal point of perception, and then allows me to go identify what has changed in the environment and caused the dissonant frequency. And then the same thing happens in nature. So I like to every morning, and usually in the evening too, I'll go out and I'll sit in the grass and it opens up to a forest. And so I'll just work on getting into a meditative type trance. And then it becomes kind of the same thing. Like at first I can kind of play with the difference between being aware of all of the different sounds and smells and everything that's going on, or I can just focus on a single bird or maybe a frog or something that's going on. But then I also start to kind of learn like the rhythm of the creatures that continue to return to that spot. So like if you think like of the bird he has a nest in that tree, and so he's going to continue to follow his rhythm and go back to his nest that's in the tree, and he's got a distinct call and a voice, and he's talking to his buddy. They're going to have a rhythm and a pattern, and then all of a sudden I'll be able to identify, oh, today there's a dissonant frequency because I've got a new bird that entered into the domain where he usually doesn't belong there. And I'd imagine the creatures probably are aware of the same thing. I'm thinking like a pack of coyotes. They're aware of their howls every night. And so they're echoing to listen to, oh, we've got our 6 friends all the time. We all howl at the same rhythm, the same pattern. All of a sudden there's a new voice that comes in. Well, every creature is going to be aware of the new dissonant frequency that's entered that. So there's definitely the play of the perception and the awareness. I think the perception would probably be more like the West because it is like its focus. It's also very individual. Awareness more East, I'd say more expansive, more of the group. And then I think blending the two together, I'd go back to my analogy where I was describing the circle. So perception would be the center point, the center dot in our circle. And then awareness would be kind of being aware of the entirety of everything that's going around. And then the blend of the two of them almost seem to provide access to the supernatural ether that's kind of beyond the perception and awareness, or being able to move perception and awareness between different elements or forms.
Yeah, exactly. These distinctions between the like you say, the focus, the perception leads you to specific informations, which, if taken to its logical extremity, will produce analysis. Right? Oh, well, that's the bird that came back to its nest and analyzed it. Oh, yeah, he's met this other, and all those, and the awareness comes from that emotional impact, almost, right? So when you're just aware of the bird song, there's a feeling. Yeah. It's a feeling base, and if we go deeper into that feeling, it's an emotion, which is like a vibrational tone of sorts in our consciousness, which moves beyond the heart in a sense. But now the Shashumna, I can only explain it like this. Like, you've been in meditation and you come out of meditation, and it's like you don't even feel like you've come out of meditation. And you look at your hand, and it's like when you're really high, yeah? And it's like, what am I looking at? Like, what is this? And then you've actually got, oh, right, yes, that's my hand, right? There's that point where you're just looking at it and you're not actually reflecting with it's just there, if that makes sense. And there comes that point where you're very aware of what it is, and you can perceive all of the patterns of it and all of the things in it and everything that's going on, but it becomes this big thing. Does that make sense? That fills up all of your, like, everywhere. This is the hand. Then you out of you. It seems things fell over for a second. And then it's almost as if your hand shrinks back down to a normal size. Does that make sense, the way I'm saying it, or is it sounding a bit too weird?
It's a little weird, but it makes sense to me. I guess I'm a little weird too.
Because it seems like things can grow and shrink in our perception and our awareness. And I think it's got to do with how much of our consciousness is just in that. And it can get to the point where you don't really notice where your body ends and where the ground begins and where the land starts. And so you'll be so relaxed in your body that you won't know where the ground begins and ends, if that makes sense. Your body and the ground, like, where does it end? It's just this continuity of experience where you are not choosing to distinguish perception or awareness from it, but you're sort of just, it's got both of them in it, because there's definitely perception, but it's not on its own. And there's definitely awareness, but it's not on its own either. I don't know if that makes sense. And it's sort of like that natural state. And I can remember it from when I was like really, really young. By really young, I mean like weeks old. And like you're stuck, and you don't know where your body begins and ends, and you don't know. And mom and dad are all me, and there's this like expansiveness where everything is sort of like part of me. Mom, you're not thinking any thoughts, you're not feeling any emotions. The emotions are coming from there, and the thoughts are coming from there, and you're like sort of like, but there is also inside of you, and inside of you is also outside there, and there's these distinctions of perception are all gone, and one is very able to perceive what one is aware of without the limits of perception. I hope that's a good way of describing it. But it's interesting, that notion of, I've often looked at my hand when I'm like in a very deep state. Like, let's say I've been in a deep trance and I've been like outside of my physical form, and I'm coming back into my body. And I look at my hand. It's the most, I can't explain it with words. It's the weirdest situation, because it takes you a while to sort of figure out, oh, right, yeah, that's my hand. Oh, right, that's on my body. Oh, right, this is next. You've got to sort of like build all these associations, put them back into place, and then realize, oh, I'm perceiving this. Oh, it's because I'm aware of this, what I'm perceiving. Okay. It's like you got to play catch up with yourself. And I think that's a state of the Akash. When one is in the Akash, there's just, everything's here right now. Everything. And whatever one's focusing on is what one's aware of. But there's no real distinction between the awareness and the perception, as there is distinction between awareness and perception when we're here. But they are both sort of the same thing. I think that's what the Akasha represents, or the fifth element. And I believe that it's like something that we've been given these metaphysical ideas about, and we've tried to distinguish it as being something separate or something different or something else, when actually what we're experiencing here is the Akash. What do you guys think about that? 22222.
Well, it reminded me of, I remember when I was really young, I can't remember what age, but I didn't have the concentration of the Western mental energy. I was much more just in flow, I'd say more of a natural awareness state. And the generation of maybe more of like the Western perception came from other people. And I call it more like an installed emotion. And so it would be like, I interacted with an adult and they had a certain fear or emotion or worry, and they transmitted that emotion. So they installed it, and it created an awareness of me that, oh, I'm not having this fear, I'm not having this emotion or thought. Maybe something is wrong with the way that I'm perceiving things, and then that generated kind of like this thought cycle. And then so it became like, oh, I'm not thinking this way, or I'm not feeling this way, but I should be aware of what other people might think about me. Do they have insight into my internal world, this external world? It just generated kind of like this different energy that I'd say it's almost like maybe like between two contact points, like a spark or an arc. Like that's kind of like what the transmission seemed like. And then it created this cycle where it's like emotion, thought, and then that pattern repeated so long that it was difficult to get outside of that. Whereas now that I'd say kind of transcended that, and I'm aware of the different states people can go through, then I can recognize when somebody's going to do that. And then so I block the arc. And so like I was with this very neurotic type person, very high anxiety, talks really fast, very head focused energy. And I had my phone out, and there were some other people around, and I was just kind of in my own world doing my thing. And he saw the way I was positioned and everything, and he's like, oh, you can't hold your phone and be positioned that way because these people are going to think that you're filming them. And like, he created this entire anxiety type situation that was not even real. And I look at him and I'm like, oh, this is the guy that I know exactly what's going on in his head. I'm going to block this arc. You can go have your neurotic episode, but I'm not you can't install any thoughts or emotions with me. I have a larger perception and awareness than you do, so I'm going to just ignore you. And so I think as a child, I didn't have that level of understanding and awareness to be able to put blocks up on when somebody's trying to have installed emotions and transmit their thoughts and stuff and all of their neurotic imagination things that go on in their head.
The guy sounds like a circus pilot a little bit. I would have probably told him to go and like basically sell tickets to these people. Go and sell tickets. They should be paying. They're being filmed. This isn't free. Go and sell tickets, dude. No, bless him. But that's very interesting. We were talking about memory before, weren't we? And how the memory is related to water. And where's cosmic when we need cosmic? Because the fairy are related to fire. You see, it's quite interesting. So the memory is that reflecting light, which is bound and held in the water element. Sort of gets its etymology. We discussed this in our last one. Those of you that haven't seen it, can take a look at last week's episode. It's all there. And then this awareness seems to operate through the memory, if that makes like some kind of sense. The awareness seems to be an expression of the memory, and the memory is expressed as an awareness. What am I smelling? There's a weird smell in the air. Someone's burning something funny. And the idea of perception is like a purse. It's what we take from our awareness and our memory to put inside our little travel bag of ideas and communication thoughts. So there's this notion of like you say, the body is like a programmable computer. I remember when I first experienced fear for myself. I was 5 years old. That was my first own fear. And I've got it like right down to the moment. And it was those naughty little beings, right? They had been with me in the forest. They used to teach me every day. They used to take me away from my mom. They used to make my mom like, she didn't know what was going on. And they were like, that's cool. Your mom can't think about you. We've made it that she can't think about you. I was like, that's cool. She's not going to worry. No, she's not going to worry. She's not even going to know where you are. She's off somewhere else. And then they were like going away, and they told me like, you need to take this to your mom as a gift from us. And it was a scorpion. And it was a black scorpion, but it had a huge tail on it. Had a massive black tail on it, thick. I'll never forget that like half that scorpion was a tail. I didn't know what that meant as a kid. So it had like a bit of what they call nasa on that sting. And of course, me being like an obedient boy, I was like, okay, I can give this to my mom as a present. And I had to call the scorpion out of the earth, which is interesting. So that's an air element, that communicating, telepathy, like calling calling, reaching out with ideas to promulgate the idea in the creature to come to me so it can come on my hand. It must come out of wherever it is. And then it emerged from like the forest, like, and like he came onto my hand, like nicely. And like I carried him like very carefully, all the way through the forest home. And then I gave him to my mom. When I gave him to my mom, I'll never forget the sound of my mom's scream. That was the first thing that hit me, that scream. And then she hit my hand, and the poor scorpion went like flying up in the air. And I'll never forget the feeling of her hand making contact with my arm, and that the vibration started to change on my arm. And I was very conscious. That was like where the perception started to be removed from the awareness, because I suddenly started to think of my arm in a different way. And I started to notice that it was vibrating differently than the rest of my body. And that vibration spread. And I noticed the whole tones, all the vibrations of my body suddenly started to get this different kind of rhythm in them. And then there was this loud noise. And I was like, oh, that's my voice. And that was where I started to distinguish between perception of my voice and the awareness of my voice as being two separate things. Before then, I didn't. How do you explain it? There wasn't a distinction between the awareness and perception of these things. There was just one. And so that's like where I had my first moment of fear. And then obviously I noticed that I was like screaming, and my mom was screaming, and then she was saying that's dangerous, that can kill you, that you mustn't pick that up. It's dangerous. And she kept sort of inserting this into me like an injection of poison. I literally felt like I was being poisoned. And so that was where my fear started, that moment, that first moment of fear. Before then, even when I was next to my dad, so my dad, I might have told the story before. Short listed. The organized crime syndicate of Cape Town murders a man in front of me. It's like about a dozen guys. They're all part of this organized crime family, whatever. This guy was a friend of my dad's. He's a musician in this 4-star hotel. Yeah, everybody's like families. He says to these guys in their own way, he says, you guys are a bunch of little yarpies. You're nothing. You're not men. There's not a man between all of you. Come outside and meet me alone in the parking lot if you've got the guts, but you're probably chicken. And these guys are laughing because there's like a dozen of them. And they go outside and meet my dad. And they all like throwing their knives and dancing with their knives, throwing from one hand to the other. And they're flicking their knives behind the back and catching the knives. And they're all like dancing with their knives. And I was like, this is ridiculous, because I'm a little boy. I'm trying to understand. This is guy dancing with his knives. You know, all these guys are dancing in a circle around my dad, throwing and catching knives. And my dad's in the center of the circle, and I ran in to stand next to my dad in the circle. Now, I wasn't that stage. I didn't have fear. I could feel and smell the fear. And I could sense telepathically that Mariki was afraid that my dad would die. She was his wife. And everybody screamed when I ran into the circle. And I stood next to my dad throughout this fight. That in the end, I was slipping in the blood on the floor. There was so much blood everywhere that I was slipping. And like these guys were laying on the floor with their heads open. Like they were just being smashed. By the time he was done with them, like those that survived were in intensive care. Not all of them survived. And but there wasn't any fear. There was no fear in me. That fear was put into me by my mother through a programming. Even though I could smell and taste the fear that was in the air, it was like an abstract thing to it. It was like this separate thing. Like, what is that? Why is everybody scared of me being here next to my dad? So I think there's definitely this absorption of memory into our bodies on a fluid level, that we take these imprints, this neuro-linguistic imprints from people around us that sort of like becomes a fundamental sort of shape of who we are. And I think it's very much watery in its element. I don't know. What do you think? Looking at it as an elemental expression.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me to pinpoint for a certain element because I think water does kind of make sense, but I'd almost say it's more of like I want to say ether, just because it kind of defies a lot of the other type of interactions and relationships that I have because it comes from somewhere that it like you're describing the fear like as a child I would have no fear. It was just being. It was just the awareness, and then something that was not part of my reality, not part of my memory, ends up being injected and generates thoughts and emotions almost like an alchemical mixture that was not previously there. And it's a transfer of one person's energetic state into another person. And I think the element of fear is very much a part of control. It's like merging of one person's perception into the group of how the way things should be. It's like I'm bringing you into my reality bubble, and then I I want to say like almost it's almost electric. It's almost like lightning in a way. I don't know if it's magnetic, like magnetism. I'm not sure. I also think of the people that are kind of like more of like the enlightenment direct transmission guru type people, where they say that they can directly transmit a impulse into you that will create enlightenment. And I think that's I think I think that's used almost as like a quick fix in a lot of ways, but I think a truly vibrational state person that's at a very high level of awareness and perception and closely aligned with the actual sacred geometrical structure of the way people can be is able to deliver a jolt into somebody else to help kind of cleanse the waters of that memory. And that's kind of like an element of a direct transmission type of a healing energy. But then I've also been around people that I would call more of like the negative polarity. So the service to self polarity, wanting to install control and fear into other people, and using, I'd say, a more advanced occult knowledge, and they're able to deliver a negative impulse into somebody else. And if that person is not aware of what they're doing, how that structure is really designed, then I think it is very much like you were describing with the fear thing with the scorpion. There's not a defense mechanism against that. And so then it becomes a part of the integrated reality of that person. And then they need somebody, they need to either do it themselves or they need somebody to help guide them in order to cleanse those waters. And then that way the poison is either distilled or purged out of the element of that water or that ether type environment.
I like that, brother. Yeah, there's definitely this. I think that this is why the aether is considered to be giving rise to all the elements. I think all the elements. I think all there is aether, if that makes sense, and everything else is the division of aether being divided and that being subdivided. Dear Indy, brother, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry, I was a
Did you have
little
something
tied
you
up,
wanted to add?
but I was listening in. Uh,
Your voice went off.
yeah, my cat's here. He wanted to mute me for a minute. He's a prankster. But I wanted to mention briefly that I know that karma has been drastically misinterpreted in the West, and there's a quick way to kind of see the Eastern portrayal that's been lost. But the word karma literally means action, and it involves good karma is associated with water and the powers of water, and whereas bad karma is associated with fire and the powers of fire. And interestingly, the powers of water to squelch fire are infinite. So the power of good karma to overcome bad karma is there, and it's really not about, as we see in the West, that fear-based analysis of like what's the dangers around me. It really has more to do with like, am I aware that I associate either negative actions with positive emotions, or positive emotions or negative emotions with positive emotions? And if so, can I change those and have those aligned so that I'm no longer enjoying to do bad things, or I'm no longer avoiding to do the good things? And then once that's done, then you're able to take that water of the good karma and squelch the fires that you created with your bad karma, and whatever kind of fire that created in the world around you, whether that be by the butterfly effect. It's known in the East that the waters of good karma, of self-transformation, what's known as repentance in the West, the ability to admit your fault and change your ways. The action of doing that is seen. My cat tells me I'm done talking, I guess. So no, but that was about what I was trying to say about the fires and waters of karma, and that the ability for us to transform our lives. Powerful thing.
That's very interesting. Because when I look at the word karma, to me, I'm seeing give and take in that word. I'm seeing ka and ma. Ma is what I take from it, what I get from it, and ka is what I give to it. And so I see the Egyptian body of the ka and the Egyptian body of the ba, which is coming through as the feminine, the ma. And if you think of like water, it resonates. It's like it's like a bubbling brook. And fire is like crackling.
Yeah.
So fire is literally saying really fast, like an engine. And water is going like if it's raining, it's like this in the background. This is humming, the sound of the rain.
Yeah.
And the R is almost like the rotation between the feminine and the masculine, between the getting and the giving. So I always think of karma as like what we're giving, what we're getting, what we're getting, what we're giving. And it's like a wheel we're stuck in. Because we got this now, it's like playing cards. Someone gave you a card, you got to give it away. Oh, they gave you another card, you got to give it away. They gave you the card. Oh, damn it, it's the same bloody card. It's like over and over and over again. You know, you're playing cards with like 3 cards. And you know, it's this crazy game of cards. That's often how I've thought of it in a sense. And I find it interesting, like when we're looking at karma and the elements, it seems like karma is a crystallized thing, right? These like something that you're carrying around in a bag almost when we consider it as a product, something we've produced. Production line has produced karma. Now you've got it in your bag. Like, let's look in your bag. Oh, here's my piece of karma. Here's my other piece of karma. And you've got all these little objects that you carry around in your bag, which is like very earthy. But it's also like the production of like, what do you give off with your fire and what do you receive with your water? The air, I think, is what connects the objects in your bag to the giving and taking of the fire and the water. Because I think of water as receiving. Water receives everything. It's programmed. You can program water. Fire is a programmer. Fire programs you. Our emotions program us. So because of what we are receiving from the effects of our actions, we are programmed by that, by the memory and the pattern and the habitual. I think memory relates to habitual rotation, and that produces in us the emotional current that drives our passions to make us do the same thing again, whether we don't really want to make the same mistakes again, do we? It's not a choice. It's not like we're in control. We are, but some part of us is like, go on, do it. What do you think about that? We're all a little bit schizoid in a sense.
There's also the concept of backwards rationalization. So like when we make a mistake, it's sometimes easier for us to come up with an excuse why that happened outside of ourselves, and then continue to use that excuse and continue to make that mistake by blaming something of an external locus of control. And that seems to be easier than having to go within and change our ways and learn to do better and ask for help. Sometimes that's a challenge for people. So, it's good to be able to do that. Good to be able to overcome our being a creature of habit and overcome our idiosyncrasies by being able to reflect on our mistakes and be willing to stop carrying these excuses with us and stop pointing our fingers and start to think, I could probably stop doing this, and I know I'm the cause of this, because we know that's all we can do is change ourselves. So, but it is entertaining for us to be in that denial and then think to ourselves like, oh, I have no control over this. The government's enslaved us all, or, whatever it is, whatever that guiding delusion is that facilitates your transgressive way or your sedentary lifestyle or whatever it is that's bringing you down. We have the power in ourselves to approach that and to deal with that and overcome it, which is really powerful. But it takes motivation, and sometimes they say you have to hit rock bottom before you really find that motivation to really want to start to climb and start to transform your life, because that's kind of what the ego will kind of lead us into, a place where we identify as our role and we see the divisions. We operate by understanding the divisions amongst us. It's a delusional architecture. But once we can overcome that and with our awareness start to realize the connections instead of seeing the mistakes of our perceptions, then we can really start to understand that I'm an integrated part of the whole. And if I can master myself, that's the best thing I could do for everything else as well.
You got me stuck on that word motivation. My brain was just like going over and over again. Like motivation. And like it's mortar. So mortar is how thick something is, how substantial something is. The mortar. Like if you're in India and you want to buy charas, mortar wala hoga. I don't want these tiny little strings of charas. Mortar wala. I want thick ones. All right. And vata. Right? Vata body type. That churning air element. Mota, vata, ion. Mota, vata, ion.
Thickness of
Motivation. Interesting concept. Because it seems to be reflecting that this vata element of the air element that is thinking and planning to make a change, because that's what air does. It thinks and plans to make a change. But like with solidarity, mortar, thick and solid, and then changing the ions in our brain changing the ions in our blood. That's going to change the way our hormones operate, change the way our consciousness is manifesting through our body, because it is an ionic experience. It's like the electrical magnetic ions.
The piezoelectricity is ionic electricity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, our red blood plates have got some interesting kind of a reaction. Yeah. That they moving electricity between the blood plates. So the white blood cells we always hear about, but what are the red blood cells for? They got to do with moving these ions through the blood, so that it's like ionic matrix of warm electromagnetically charged metals in a plasma solution. Plasma meaning etheric. So the blood is essentially ethericized, and the plasma, it's why we call it blood plasma. It's got this, and we know what plasma is, right? Because we've seen it on like sci-fi movies, the plasma rifle. It's ions, isn't it? It's bound ions. So it's quite an interesting concept, you know. And that's so the getting back to what you were saying, that motivation that that we need. I think this is why the Vata body type is not so quick to act. Does it make sense? They're too busy thinking about what it is they should be doing. Where the Pitta element is like, get it done, just do it, go head first. And then the Kapha is like between the ranges of like, no, just let it be. Right? Let it be done. And so, you know, I think that this brings us to the point of the tauric field, like what Taurus represents energetically in the zodiac, represents that when things come from the inside to the outside, when things go from the outside to the inside. And that is a point of rest, isn't it? It's a fundamental point of rest between externalization and internalization. One has to be the eye of the storm for that to happen. A hurricane needs to form around an eye. And where you've got the eye of the storm, you've got profound forces moving up and down, haven't you?
Yeah.
To make that vortex. But within that eye, there's this point of rest. And so I think Taurus represents that point of rest in the eye of the storm, where the thinking, feeling, and doing are the reactions of these three manifesting poles. But this is all bound in rest. So the rest is like that tauric field, which makes the thinking and the doing and the, I don't know, could we call it being, which I think is an interesting word, right? Like we assume we know what the word being means, but what does it really mean? Is being when we're combining all of these three, in a sense. And I think from a motivational perspective point, we don't recognize how important our breathing is, because like the breathing contains all four of the elements. And I was getting to that earlier, something that Mexico had said. So we breathe in inspiration. Breathing in also produces heat in the body, by the way. Yeah. Breathing out releases heat from the body. Holding the breath within, between the breathing in and the breathing out, produces the movement in the body. And between the breathing out and the breathing in point, where there's a sense of emptiness, produces the rest in the body. So we can see how the breath is a fourfold system that are essentially inspiration of fire, being inspiring, breathing in, the expiration of water, which is why to the ancient Egyptians, water represented leaving this world. Flesh puppet left behind, right? The land of water, Isis. And the element of air is that movement within us, rotation. And then the element of earth is where we plant that seed in a dark, cool, resting place. What an interesting concept. And I think that we don't realize how we can control the elemental energies in our body with our breath, by how much of our focus is our breath is on the in-breath. For example, what have we noticed about anxiety?
Slow your breathing, slow your mind.
Anxiety is when you're not breathing in enough.
Deeper
No?
breaths. Slow, deep breaths.
So, yeah, exactly. But like, if you look at someone when they're in a state of anxiety, they're like, right? They're doing instant automatic pranayama, and they don't realize that they're doing pranayama because they're actually changing their consciousness with their breath and moving their energies in such a particular pattern that they become overly focused on the watery element, and that in itself becomes a fixation, I think, with the overly reflecting upon things. Much love, Mexico. Much love. So yeah, I think that there's definitely something to be looked at when we look at this, like in a interesting perspective, because stress and anxiety relate to the kidneys and the bladders from a Taoist perspective, and it relates to I think the spleen as well. With worrying, probably becomes. Isn't it interesting how fear leads to worry? Or worry leads to fear. And so there's this sort of fundamental connection. But fear is the water element. And so that fear can open up the door to anxiety. Where if we look at the fire element, that is bringing in new energy, which is why we can become like agitated or impatient if we breathing in too much. If you spend too much time breathing in and not enough time breathing out, it's when you're agitated and you're annoyed and you're volatile. And if you spend too much time with the air in your lungs pent up, then you'll be a space cadet, spaced out. If you spend too much time with the air out of your lungs, you might be lethargic. So we can reprogram our bodies and our consciousness by the way in which we choose to allow the pattern of the breath and the rhythm of the breath to flow through us. And ideally, I mean, we want to keep them all in a similar level, you know. But sometimes it's useful to, for example, if you're cold and you need to be warmer, changing your pattern of your breath will make you feel more comfortable. Or if it's hot and you need to be cooler, changing the pattern of your breath will help. And I've noticed this, like at places where I've been in the cold or in the hot. Did I tell you I spent a summer in Rajasthan in 58 in the shade, 57, 58 in the shade. I spent a couple of summers there. Can you believe it? By
Cool.
choice.
Where's that near? Is
Much
that
love, Kevin.
Is that near the mountains in the north?
What was that, brother?
Is it near the mountains in the north, or is it by the sea in the south? Where's it at?
Rajasthan is the hottest civilized place on earth. It's on the border of Pakistan. It's in the north of India,
Hmm.
not so far north. It's south of Delhi. I think it's about a 24. Is it a 24-hour ride, bus ride from Delhi?
Okay.
Could be something along those lines. So it's like 2 buses. Or is it? Am I mistaken? I think it is, because you got to go to Jaisalmer. No, Jaipur. Jaipur is where all the gems come from.
Cool.
So if you're going from Bombay to Delhi, and then you draw a triangle to where that 2 is like almost off towards the western direction on the border of Pakistan, there's a big desert, and that's where Rajasthan is. And then you've got Udaipur, Pushkar, and Jaisalmer. And you've got Pushkar. But Pushkar tends to be not quite as hot as Udaipur or Jaisalmer. Jaisalmer tends to be a little bit drier, but Udaipur tends to get pretty hot when you get out of Udaipur.
So when you say 56, you're saying 56 Celsius?
Celsius.
Yeah.
56, 57, 58. So what is that to your measurements?
Probably like 80 or 90.
134.
Oh my God.
134.6. That's 57. It went up to 58, but 56, 57, 55, 125, 130, 134. Like 130 is like a typical summer there. So I've spent a few summers out there. I still love going there for summer. My ex-wife was like, I'll never forget it because, hey?
Dry heat there or humid?
Yeah, it's pretty dry heat. You
Yeah.
sweat all the time.
Yeah.
At midnight, it's like, what's the midnight temperature? Oh my gosh. It'll blow your mind, man.
That night?
86 degrees in midnight.
Oh my God. Wow.
You got to sleep in that. No, it can be 90 degrees. It can be hotter in midnight. Depends. But that's a typical midnight.
That's tough. I wouldn't get much sleep in that.
No, I'm talking nonsense, man. It gets hotter than that at midnight. Yeah,
Ah.
it could be like 90 plus. So, yeah, and it's scorpion land. There's lots of scorpions. Like lots. You've never seen so many scorpions before in your life.
God, I have to like sleep underwater with a snorkel or something. They don't swim, do they?
One of the ashrams where I used to go spend time at, called Nandeshwari Ashram, there were scorpions breeding under the ashram. Like loads of them, all different colors.
God.
And they used to come out and they'd be climbing up the wall, and you like 30, 40 scorpions. This is the Dharamsala where you live.
Oh my God.
And they come into your rooms.
Oh no.
And I used to catch all the scorpions, because I was like, if I didn't catch them, if they get the local people
Oof.
who are like in the ashram, who've been in India for years, they've got no compassion for these creatures. They'll bring a thing and just crush it.
Oh.
They'll just smack them and squash them. So I used to do acrobatics, because you know that scorpions, they jump.
Really?
Did you know that they jump and that they go for you when you're trying to catch them?
Oh God.
It's like a fight, bro. They're coming at you. Bro, they're jumping at you. You've got to be quick on your feet. You've got to jump out of the way, jump, and catch him with a container. Now you got him. Now you got to put something underneath the container, pop him into the container. You got to keep something on top of that container, because he'll jump out And when he jumps out, he's got that little thing up there swinging. Yeah. Catching scorpions is a scary thing. It's much better to just leave them and let them do their thing. But I used to be the scorpion catcher because I didn't want to see them being killed. You know,
Scorpions
Love
are
the little
something
guy.
perplexing to me. I feel like scorpions associated with water element in the zodiac. So to me, that's very strange. It's almost like they were thinking of the lobster. They got mixed up. But it's also associated with the eagle, which I don't see how the eagle's really associated with water, although they do eat fish. But
That is-
I've seen scorpions in the desert before. I know they like to climb into shoes.
Yeah, no. The whole idea of that's a very interesting concept because, like, leaving the flesh puppet behind, right? Scorpions represent that.
Ah,
They're very good at making flesh puppets go away, like smaller flesh puppets. They're good little hunters. They got their how would you say it? They got their
their scythe in
they
hand.
got their crap together.
Yeah.
They don't mess around with it. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, and I suppose there's something about a scorpion that's a bit like a wasp.
Mm,
A wasp is like a flying scorpion if you think about it.
yeah. I've been
Some of them
having
are pretty.
the wasps and hornets have been attacking me at work lately doing gardening. And I found that if you catch the first 2 or 3 and kill them while they're biting you, they all back off. I feel bad
Is
doing
that
it.
so?
Yeah, I feel like it's their top dogs that go first. And if they don't make it, they're like, oh, screw that.
Yeah, I think you're communicating with the being.
Yeah. I think what they're really going for is to instill fear, and also if I'm not scared or agitated, they just kind of back off. I appreciate when I get stung by something because it's like caffeine for me. I'm not allergic. It'll boost my immune system. It's a bit
It
agitating.
can make you quite high.
Yeah, it does.
It can make the weed work better.
It will give you that extra boost. It's not that bad as long as you're not allergic. But snake bites can be very intoxicating. But you wanna get help for those. I know a guy that got bit in the Everglades, and he didn't want to seek help. He said, "Oh, this is fun. I feel like I took some mushrooms or something." I said, "We're gonna get you out of here. Can't just sit there." But they kind of portrayed it in what was it? Natural Born Killers. They got bit by a snake and they were tripping out. I don't
Yeah.
think they actually get any antivenom. I think they might have sucked it out and somehow survived.
I know someone who had relayed a story to me that he'd been bitten by a snake in the water,
Oh God.
and he had sort of lost consciousness and gone under the water, and he said he went somewhere else.
I hope it wasn't in the ocean.
No, he was in a
other water
there was like a little waterfall. It was like the water, and he basically lost consciousness. And he thought the way he described to me was like he'd had some kind of a weird near-death experience, and he didn't know how long he was under the water for. And then he just came up out of the water, and it was like, and I was like, "That's
there for
a
too long.
fascinating experience."
Wow.
What snake was that?
Yeah, water moccasin probably.
It was in India.
Oh,
It was in
okay.
India. He reckoned it was a cobra that had bitten him as he was getting out of the water.
Damn.
But then, like, it bit him, and he said, like, very quickly it hit him, and he was tripping off his nuts. Didn't know where he was, and he fell in the water, and he lost consciousness under the water. And I can tell you that I've been unconscious in the sea a number of times. I must have been unconscious in the sea for like 5 minutes.
God. How does your
Or
body
minutes.
try to breathe in there?
I have no idea how it does it.
Hmm.
But I've washed up on the shoreline, and I'm talking big waves, huh? where I've been knocked out by the waves surfing 100 meters out to sea. And somehow the sea carries me to the land. And I wake up thinking like, where am I? The last thing I can remember is a massive wave closing out on me.
Whoa. Man. Must be good. Jeez.
Obviously, it gave me a thump on the head, you know?
Yeah.
And no. One time, I mean, it's been happened more than once. I used to go in the bottom of the washing machine. You used to surf, yeah? You get into a big, if it's deep water, the wave churns underneath so much that it makes a washing machine, and you basically going round and round and round in the wave. And I used to roll myself up in a ball and start counting. 1, 2, 3 in my mind, 4. And I feel like you lose up and down perspective because you're rolling like a ball down the hill. And I used to fall asleep under the waves.
What? Maybe it hypnotized you a little bit.
Yeah, I used to count because it's scary as hell, man.
God, how could you fall asleep when you're scared like
It's
that?
scary as hell.
Easier to
Scary as hell. Because
out.
if you try and fight it, you feel like you're dying.
God.
So the best thing to do is to roll up like a ball and just start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't allow yourself to think.
Conserve energy that way so much.
You start getting drowsy. And you just keep counting while you're drowsy. You keep counting while you're drowsy. And somehow you can wash up on the beach later.
Man.
If you don't panic.
Yeah.
Like, I think the human consciousness, I think the elemental energies around our bodies can protect us.
Yeah, it's amazing when you believe in the powers of the body to be able to get through these situations and these dire situations people can get into. It's amazing what it can get through. Have you ever heard of the ghost of Maine? There was a guy that they had found. They called him a ghost for decades because people's food would just be missing out of their fridge. There'd be no signs of entry, and it was going on all across a bunch of towns. And they never found him, but this one place that never had a camera all of a sudden installed a secret hidden camera by their fridge in the restaurant. And he went into their cooler in there and got some food, and they finally caught up with him. And he had lived outside in Maine in a tent for decades. He ran away in the 80s. He thought that the Cold War was going to create a Holocaust, and he wanted to be the sole survivor and live out there in the wilderness. And he had never spoken to anyone for the whole time except for once. He said hi to someone one time. But in the nights when he was going to die, and it was like -20, -40 degrees, and he was living in a tent, he said that he would just go into meditation, and he would be able to regulate and come back into being warm again, and when they would be able to make it through the night every time. But he was on the verge of death like nearly every night.
Interesting concept, huh?
It's amazing.
Yeah. I think it comes down to, once again, like it comes back down to the breathing of that cycle of the energy, you know?
Mhm.
And if you can rest with your lungs empty,
Yeah, you got to surrender.
if you can rest between your lungs becoming full and empty without moving the air, what a concept. Then you go into sort of like a deep trance. Like I remember noticing that I was breathing in and out once at the same time. Obviously, it was like a fairly substantial dose of psychedelics. And I was like, I'm not breathing. I was like, this is interesting. I'm not breathing. And I started to really observe this phenomenon. And I went into my lungs and I noticed, hold on, there's air coming out of my lungs, but very slowly. But hold on, there's air going in my lungs very slowly. And I was sort of like breathing in one place in my lungs and breathing out the other place in my lungs, but so slowly that I never took a breath in or never took a breath out.
Amazing.
First, I got like really alarmed by this. I was like, oh, this is weird. Like, I've got to breathe. I'm going to die. You see the paranoia sets in, like, I'm not breathing, dude. What am I going to do? Then you observe it. You go, but I don't feel bad. I feel okay. But maybe I should like be breathing. Surely I should be. But I feel completely comfortable. Like I'd basically forgotten how to breathe.
But your body remembered again.
My body was breathing in and out at the same time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I observed this for a long period of time.
I feel like this is
And I realized that, oh, hold on, it's like circular breathing with a didgeridoo somehow. But your body can go into this really deep trance where you're not breathing. And you're obviously very high if your body's doing that. So if you can get your body to that even kill of breathing, you get extremely high. The same way that if you get extremely high, your body breathes like that, like automatically.
We have different esophagus and tracheal set up than other primates. We have the throat of the aquatic mammal, and they have a throat like ours so that they can breathe through their ears or their porthole.
Who?
Different aquatic mammals, the pinnipeds and cetaceans like seals and dolphins, or the sirenians, the manatees.
And we've also got a connection through our ears, can't we?
We do. I mean, like change the pressure and the altitudes. You can like change the pressure in your ears. Some people have an extra hole in their ears, which they think may be an ancestral trait from a time when we might have lived in the sea for millions of years, because we have all the traits that we have are indicative of an aquatic mammal. And
That's rather interesting.
our nutrition also is indicative of an aquatic mammal as well. And the fact that we kind of disappeared from the fossil record and then reemerged with a enlarged cranium is also a sign of having been in a nutrient-rich environment like the sea, with things like DHEA or fish oil, which is known to be brain food. Because originally they had thought maybe it was from being able to use tools to open up different parts of the animal that we wouldn't normally eat. Maybe eating brain tissue maybe was able to have us build such a large cranium in a short time. But we know that other predators on the savannah eat brain tissue all the time, and they didn't seem to overcome any changes. So it seems like that kind of food would not necessarily create the kind of transformation that it would of living at sea, because the food is much more proliferate there. There's so many different things that are essential for us that we don't get from land food that we need. Like we really need iodine for women that are pregnant for their children, which is not something you get on land. And without enough iodine, it can create cretinism, which leads to learning disorders and brain damage and stuff. So it's interesting how we really do well with like omega-3 rich foods. So it's like vegetables that have an omega-3 rich profile are really good because they kind of resemble the fish, which has an omega-3 rich profile. So also the things that we eat like dairy and meat are inflammatory and acidic. So they lead to an environment in our bodies with the acidic pH balance is not good. It's welcoming in different conditions, diseases, parasites, and things, because it weakens us when we have too acidic of an internal pH. It's good to have an acidic external pH for our skin and protect us, but inside we want to alkalize. and through a lot of different like seaweeds, we can alkalize and get that iodine that we need.
Yeah, the whole idea of the aquatic element to our nature, which is quite interesting. Like we've still got the webs between our fingers
Yeah, one
and
out
our
of a
toes.
has it profound.
And some people have more webs between their fingers and toes than other people, which is also quite, fascinating if you look at it.
100. And one of 1,000 has a tail.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely something to this notion about aquatic history of human being. And I do get the sense that there's a lot more to this. And we seem to be quite fascinated with water.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's interesting how if we came from the sea, why are we the only ones species that can't really swim? But it seems like we go through a process where I think normally we would have been kind of raised in and around the water when we're young, because like on land we can't even raise our heads. You know what I mean? But as a baby, we can swim underwater, hold our breath, and then come and turn belly up to breathe instinctually. But once we learn to speak and walk, we no longer have our instinctual capabilities to do that. And when we learn how to walk, we lose our ability to swim. And so that's why we kind of develop this fear of water, because we've kind of abandoned our instincts and we've come into a place where we're reliant on following something that's unnatural for us. It seems that way.
Yeah, I had to go through that after I drowned. Had to relearn how to. My dad helped me. He threw me in the water. Face your fears, boy. There you go. Splash. Ah! But it sort of shocked me back into reality, and I sort of quickly embraced how important it was to learn to swim. That I had to face my fears. Because he was basically saying to me, like, you can't not swim. Basically, what if you ever fall in water? What are you going to do? Let me show you. I was like, okay, get me swimming. I don't want to do that again, So I do think that we've basically definitely got a fascination with the water element. It's also interesting how we tend to be so reflective human beings. We tend to in the water element, I think part of the water element is relating myself to you and seeing what is commonality between you and me. Looking at my reflection in the water is like a watery thing. And so seeing how my reflection is similar to you. When you look at the reflections of people in the water, they look a lot more similar, don't they?
Indeed.
So we all look, oh, we're all similar because look at the reflection. My reflection looks like yours, very similar. It sort of brings us closer to, and we tend to compare ourselves to other people a lot. And I think the idea of comparing in that sense is a watery trait. That makes sense. Which is why women do it more often than men.
Yes.
Men do it a bit, but I think women really get the t-shirt for that stunt. You see a group of women like comparing their boobs to each other's boobs, and comparing their butts to each other's butts, and comparing everything.
I think a water wants to match with stuff and like mimic it. What it kind of idealizes. So it uses that to try to ascend and transmute into that. And I think it can be hard for a water element to, instead of like holding the container of the environment, like have like some kind of like a core personality where you'll carry into each different environment that shows the universal aspect of yourself. You can kind of become different people and with different environments, with different folks.
Yeah.
And then
My ex-wife was like that very much. She was very Cancerian, and I'm very fiery. I think fire is very much fire and earth are more like what they are.
yeah,
Water and air are more like mimicry, in a sense. Water is very much mimicry, like, you know. Air is also like very adaptable,
yes,
you know, but water is like really right in there. And so that was actually something that I always found a bit weird about her. She would be a really different person around different people. I was like, what the hell? To me, it seemed like a lack of integrity. From my perspective, yeah, fire. I'm fire and earth. So I'm like, you know, express and be what I am, and like I'm a bull. I'm moons in Taurus. You're not going to move me. Forget it. I'm stubborn. I'm here, and I need to express who I am from my Leo nature. So that these two like are very much, you know, about that core integrous sort of who I am kind of concept, being me. And I do think that when we consider the fire element, I think fire is the least understood of the elements, even though it's probably the element that drives. Like if you look at India, right? People there seem to be more fiery. I noticed there's like a very powerful what's the word? People are very expressive, almost overtly expressive. If that makes sense.
you see it in
Fire is an overtly expressive element.
in their eyes and nostrils. How do you
Sorry?
How do you notice it in them? Do they see it in you see it in their eyes, or how do you see it?
The way they speak,
Yeah,
the way they the flamboyance, if that makes sense. Like there's almost an excessive flamboyance, where like the watery archetype, like in England, is much more like reserved, and it's like don't express your feelings, like understate everything. The British are very good at understating everything, you know, like I just came from a city, all the buildings had fallen down, and you know, a bit of a bomb had gone off there. In India, it would be like, well, it was this huge explosion. The buildings were falling all over. You know what I mean? It's like it's a powerful, exuberant, emotional current, or this like very cool, chilled out, like the buildings had fallen down, and, you know, laying on the floor. And it's interesting, like looking at the watery aspect of our Western sort of indoctrination. I think we've been taught to be mimics in school because they've overstimulated our memory. And if memory is what water is, water holds memory, then by them overstimulating our memory, they've sort of trained us to be more, what's the word, receptive to programming. So water can be easily programmed, and by us becoming more watery, we can be more easily programmed. I think the Indians are very difficult to program because they just do what they want. Like in England, if you're walking in Victoria Station, tube station or train station, you've got to know where to walk. If you're there, you've got to walk in that direction. If you're there, you've got to walk in that direction. If you're there and everybody's walking and they all know where they're going. If you're in India, everybody's just walking like it's a free-for-all, bro.
yeah.
Everybody just walks the direction they want to walk in. Everybody's bumping into everybody. It's a mess.
Oh my god.
But in England, it's not. It's all ordained. Like, and if you're not walking in the right direction, in the right place, people are, they start talking like Minecraft villages. I've learned about these Minecraft villages from my little boy. They go like, oh. That's all they do. That's how they talk. So you have these British people like grunting at you, and like, because you're in their way, they don't know where to go. Because like you're walking this direction, And me, when I first got to England from where did I get there from? I think I've been in Israel for a while, but I'm like South African, and it blew my mind that I actually had to stop, and I was staring at this. I was like, I've never seen this before, and so they must have thought I was nuts because I was standing there laughing my butt off. To me, people were like ants. I was like, how the hell do they know which way to walk? They all know which way where they got to go. Like, why? Because I'm from Africa. Africa's like India. Everybody just walks. It's a free for all, you know. Just try not to bump too many people while you're walking, because everybody's going to walk in the direction they want to walk in, and that's just what it is. It doesn't fly in a place like Victoria, in Victoria Station, in or London Bridge, or any of those places. It's interesting. I think it's part of our watery element conditioning, because water wants to flow in a very particular line and pulls all the other water to flow like a river. So everything's flowing in particular. Fire is just burning wild. It's like burning everywhere. Wherever the wind blows at this moment's where the fire goes. Another wind goes there, and the fire goes there, and the wind goes there, and the fire is just all over. It's like dancing. It's like a crazy, wild, crazy dancer. It's just all over the shop.
You can contain it with water, though.
And that brings me to the shamanic element of the fire element, being the element of the dance. So when you're dancing in a shamanic dance, obviously the elements come into play, but it seems like very often it's the fire element. Maybe that's for me. If that makes sense. Like you feel like fire when you're dancing. And does that make sense to you?
Yeah, fire looks like dancing.
Yeah. And you're like throwing your arms out there, and you're throwing like the coals, and the flames are just licking everywhere, and you're all over the show, and you're like flowing like fire, but fire's got its own sort of rhythm, which is interesting. Where water is very much more structured. It's flowing, it's what it is. It's flowing that direction. It just keeps flowing. And earth is just like it's solid, Air is also very much like the dancing thing as well. It's like, swirling around all over the shop. But that, I think the fire rituals that we are quite aware of, and fire rituals have been sort of central to most of the religious practices, have they not? Are probably central to what has become religion. Fire, burnt offerings. It's part of the Greco origin. The Romans were doing it, the Greeks were doing it, the Jews were doing it, the Arabic Muslim people were doing it. Who wasn't doing it? And how we cook our food. That's another interesting concept. Because we don't have to cook all the food we eat, but we do. So we cleanse all of our food with fire. Partly to cleanse the food. Where did we learn this? Because animals eat their meat raw. If that makes sense. Obviously, if we're going to store food, we're going to want to clean it.
We have brittle teeth and fingernails. We have low density muscles and bones. They have awkward mobility. So it's very hard for us to capture prey. And when we capture land prey, we don't really have the fingernails and teeth to be a carnivore. We can eat fish raw, but with our brittle fingernails and teeth, we really can't eat meat without fire and a cutting tool, unless we let it rot.
So it relates to the eating of meat, which is interesting. And probably to burn out the the
Parasites.
things that can go into our body
Yeah.
and hurt us. Right? Like the little hojas that can go and live inside our bodies. So yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot to be considered when we consider the cycle of the breath shaping our consciousness, how we are in tune to this modern age. Like I'm looking at you and there's electricity moving around in the screen with light coming out. It's very much like fire, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like fake fire. So we're using fake fire to communicate through the air element. It's almost bizarre. It's almost weird. My bladder is filling up. I feel like a puffer fish. Filling up my bladder. Getting.
Sorry about that.
Is that your phone, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, brother. I think we should be getting towards wrapping it up. I wanted to do this one in 4 hours, but we'll see. We've got like 25 minutes left. Wrapping up to the 4 hours. What have we not covered in terms of the 5 elements?
Um.
The notion of the earth being in the center
Yeah.
and the earth representing in the Taoist system the changing from one element to another, but not having not having a place in the seasons other than that point of change. So the point of alchemy is where the earth is happening. And so that sort of is quite an interesting concept, that the earth is sort of left out. And it sort of, I suppose, represents that the earth contains all the others, no?
Yeah, I could see that. Absolutely.
It's the meeting point of all the other elements, so it must contain all of these elements within the earth element.
For sure. And
so-
also, like dirt, there's an element of water and dirt, and fire makes ashes into the dirt. The air in the dirt, you got like dust devils.
Churning. No, but I mean, even in the air, even in the earth, you've got nitrogen and CO2 and oxygen churning through the soil.
Absolutely. The loose soil breathes good.
Yeah. So like moles and worms and creatures bring the air into the soil.
Yeah. Aerate the soil. Mm.
So it's like a very interesting concept when we look at how the earth contains all the elements. And so I think the Taoists were really onto something there. And it's reflected in the Kabbalistic lore as well. Seems to speak the same language. Where the Malkut contains all the other Sephirot. And is the sort of expression of all of the Sephirot in a single tone of expression of the potentialities of form, and the intelligences and powers that manifest this structure that we see as reality. So there's definitely a relationship between the earth and the Akasha, right? If that makes sense. So when we look at that, then we see is like Brahma. Brahma is in some stories considered as being sitting in Muladhara chakra, facing in 4 directions. And that's the creative intelligence, the generator. And so when we look at that,
Root chakra.
it sort of suggests that the Akasha or the Aether is most abundant in the earth element. Isn't that an interesting concept?
Yeah.
So then the Taoists didn't need a separate element to consider the Akasha or the Aether. They used the earth as that conduit.
So the ether could be all encompassing, or the earth.
Well, they didn't have the ether in their system, but the ether seems to be present in the earth,
Yeah.
connecting all the other elements, which is what the ether does, and giving rise to all the other elements. All the other elements are part of the earth. So the earth gives rise to all the other elements in a sense. So it's like the undifferentiated. And then from that differentiation, there comes more differentiation. One form of this: fire, water, air. But all of these are part of the earth. The earth element contains them all. In a sort of very direct and manifestational way. So yeah, brother, I think we've gotten to a great point in this conversation. I really got to go and pee, man. I've never been so desperate for a wee in my life, and but I didn't want to walk away because it would be like, detrimental to the conversation. Although I'm definitely going to step out into the garden and share my nitrogen with a tree, I think. I like to feed trees nitrogen. And because they're the only ones that can actually process the nitrogen from our urine. Because they're big enough. Smaller plants, they can't handle it. It's an OD, it's an overdose of nitrogen. But the tree needs that much nitrogen that it's like they're good to go. It's like, you got any more?
Is the sodium damage to them?
Is there anything else you wanted to add to the conversation, to the discussion?
I don't know. Just was thinking that I was thinking about pirates coming from pirate and firemen.
Pirates.
Pirates.
Pyramids.
Men of the
Yes.
fire.
Perambulate.
Middle of the fire.
Perambulate. Pyramid.
So
Pirates. Pirates.
point out that a lot of people aren't aware of that association with fire. But the pirates would burn other ships. The pyramids, there's a lot of going on there. There's water underneath. It doesn't seem like there was any soot from fire, but there's likely some kind of electricity or
I think there was something that went in there that produced heat.
ethereal fire.
Like that produced some kind of internal fire of some sort.
Yeah.
In the king's chamber where the casket is. I think something went in there. Because they mention this in the Sumerian tablets. They talk about it as like fiery. They mention having these things in their ships. First point, interesting. They mention having these things in their ships that they would feed water. That would be the propulsion system for their ships. And I think they had these things in the pyramids along with certain crystals that they had brought from Nibiru to Earth that were different to our crystals. And those crystals with that fiery device in there, which was the same propulsion system they used in their ships, which was activated by water, was so there's definitely something interesting there going on with the pyramids and relating to fire. I definitely think that they had some kind of a device of internal, maybe fire is not the right word, but some kind of a, would you think of a powerful ionic reaction that's eating away at something, a fuel source, as fire. I would say that seems like fire, right?
Yeah,
A nuclear fission is a fire, isn't it?
they may have been using mercury as well.
Could they have had some fission device?
Yes.
But maybe they learned how to do it cleanly. We're like clunking around with our like way of doing it. Maybe they had a way of doing something similar to that, not quite the way we do it, but in a clean way, using cleaner materials.
Mhm.
And that would explain why they fed it water. Water being diamagnetic can be a fuel. There's another thing about water. Water I've always considered as prana, as slowing down life force. Life force like moving and vibrating fast. And as the life force vibration becomes slower and slower, it coheses, it becomes water. And that the universe is sort of squeezing water out of itself. Like the black holes, as they've taught us, apparently the only thing that escapes that is water.
Wow.
So water forms on the edge of a black hole and moves away from a black hole. It's the only thing that moves outwards. Everything else has been pulled into its gravity field, but the water is moving away from the black holes. This is like according to the black hole theories that they've got out there. But it definitely involves the element of water, that diamagnetic quality of water to be able to be diamagnetically opposing the natural gravity, which is why water is able to evaporate. Like it can literally move away from the earth.
Yeah. That's
So many
amazing.
things do that. It's like, bye.
There's also a watery shield around our solar system too, called the Oort cloud. And there's another icy shield called the Kuiper belt.
That's interesting. That could be Nibiru. I mean, the other planet, Tiamat. Was
Yeah.
supposed to be a really big planet.
Yeah. Nibiru.
And all that was an oceanic planet.
Yeah.
Thinking about our connection to the oceanic kind of kingdom reality as a sort.
There's a lot of
So-
water in the asteroid belt in Ceres, the biggest asteroid. It's like a dwarf planet size. Has like lights on the backside that shine. They think that it's like something glowing in the ice, maybe tectonic activity. They don't think that they didn't detect any, so it's kind of anomalous. But there's definitely a lot of water in the asteroid belt, which is likely the remnants of Tiamat.
Yeah.
But they're referring to it as Thea now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's rather interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about what that represents, I mean, Thea is that the first name of God in the ancient Greek pantheon?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or divinity? The goddess of sight and vision.
Mm.
And she endowed gold, silver, and gems with their brilliance and intrinsic value. Isn't that an interesting concept?
Yeah.
And so also the goddess of the divine light is her other sort of name. And she is the ether in the bright blue sky. And that our eyes emits a beam of light that travels away from us that we're able to see. And Thea is this goddess that gives humanity sight to see. What an interesting concept, huh?
Yeah. It's amazing.
So they
So-
changed the name of Ceres to Thea.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at who Ceres is. Ceres is interesting. We've got a Ceres here.
Goddess of
Yeah, in South Africa, where we've got Water Spring. So that's a goddess of agriculture.
she holds the
She's
crop.
fertility.
Yeah.
But now we're talking about Greco-Roman goddess.
She holds a scythe and a crop.
What was that?
She holds like a scythe, like a
Yes,
scepter.
Saturn.
Yeah.
I think it's an old form of Saturn
Mm,
when Saturn was feminine.
yeah. Yeah, I'll go back to goddesses a lot of times.
That was when the sun was feminine too, and the moon was masculine. That's during the days of Atlas.
Yeah.
So Ceres is essentially Saturn. What an interesting concept. I never really drew that distinction before. But Saturn is the old god of agriculture, the reaper, and of reaping the fertility. And the Greek counterpart is Demeter. So Demeter is basically the Greek from where this comes. Why would the name have changed so much? Seer, Seer, Seer-S. Seer-S. Because the seer is someone that can see. It's a seer. That's quite interesting. I think there's a lot to be looked at when we look at these elemental natures of these gods and how they relate, these deities relate to the fundamental elements within our bodies, and that they changed this moon's name from Ceres to Thea. Can I ask you, do you know when they did that?
They changed from Tiamat to Thea. They're talking about it now because they're looking at how our core seems to have merged with another core, and there's like a bubble in there where you can see that they've met, and there's like a line, and there's also like a huge ocean inside the mantle of water that seems to have come in there and crashed in from Thea. And there's like right here where I'm at in North Carolina, down through Georgia and into Florida, there's an underground ocean here. That's at the depth. They have not found the bottom of the depth. They've gone 4 miles down. It's more than 4 miles deep.
Wow.
You know,
Wow. How deep is this ocean under the ground?
it's absolutely massive. There's a spring down in Georgia, a Lithia spring, and my friend's property is next door, and he has access to Lithia spring
What
there.
I mean, how deep do you have to drill to reach the ocean?
The saltwater ocean underground, and it's coming up in these wells over there in these springs, and they desalinate it and sell it as drinking water. But I have some of the salt from it. But it's like an unknown ecosystem down there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Like the different waters beneath us. I wonder what's Cape Town's got underneath, because we were on an aquifer. Wonder how much of that aquifer is fresh and salt.
Yeah.
Which parts are which, you know.
That's awesome.
Anyway, shall we wrap it up? It's getting towards the 4-hour mark. And I haven't peed on the floor yet, which is yay! Crowds are cheering. I didn't need to use a pot or a jug or anything. Yay! I'm surely an adult. If I was a little boy, I would have wet myself long time ago. But thank you, dear brother. Thank you, all of you that enjoyed the show with us. I hope you guys came what you got what you came for. Hope you enjoyed the ride. I think it was a fascinating discussion, and I'm so looking forward to going to have some bonding time with the element of water and remove some of these excessive ions in my body. Very, very charged about this idea. But it's been an honor, as always, dear brother, with your lovely diverse ideas and your diverse intellect. And Aaron and Cosmic as well. It was lovely. Sending you so much love. Sending you all so much love. Have an absolutely awesome day. Don't forget to smile, everybody. Life is just so exceedingly short. And don't forget to work with the elemental energies in your body with your breath. It's the most accessible way to reprogram the elements into your body. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.